All right. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of On the Couch, where we're going to kind of unwind a bit and talk about safety. Uh, this one is going to be a little less structured than I usual. Usually, we have quite a bit of stuff planned out to talk about, but for now, we're looking at kind of the very high levels and just kind of really diving deep into some of these topics because this is the important one for us. And this one, in a lot of ways, is very different from the rest of the Couchform principles for a few reasons. But the big one is because this one we consider to be essential. This is our emphatic case that safety is an essential part of roleplay, and that us creating this principle to talk about it is our assertion that it should at least be thought about and should definitely be designed with safety in mind to ensure that roleplays run ethically and smoothly and for the player to enjoy their experience within it, along with anyone else who is involved, staff, uh, creators, etc. Just make sure everyone has a good time. All right.
hmm
It's kind of a
Yeah, I suppose we should probably revisit the definition here of essential because I imagine, we might have people watching these out of order. Um, Probably revisit that really quick.
yes.
So Couchform, we have 12 principles, and 11 of those are stylistic. What stylistic means is that different role plays are going to have different styles to them, and that's a good thing, right? We want variety. We want it's a great thing to be able to try out different things and have like different ways of doing things. However, uh, we differentiate essential methods. Essential methods are required and necessary for a role play to happen safely and responsibly. And there are a couple of things that we would consider essential, but I suppose the only principle on our list for Couchform that would consider essential is this one. So um, essentially what we're saying, safety is important, really, really important, and it's so important that we will die on this hill,
Hmm.
so to speak. Um, but yeah. Um, so yeah, normally we would probably be a bit more loose, and we'd be talking about stylistic differences, meaning this is just the thing that we like to do. But today's principle, safety enables intensity. Um, we would like everyone to really think about this, or anybody who likes role play and anybody who wants to play in role plays or run role plays. Uh, I suppose I hope you listen and really really think about this because yeah, I don't know. I think it's important.
Hmm. Before we get on any further, I realize we haven't even gone through introductions. So we have our guest here, 1-800 Hot Beef. If you'd like to
That's
introduce
me.
yourself.
Hello. I'm 1-800 Hot Beef. I have been doing VRP since early 2020, I think. Kind of like around the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, and yeah, I've been in and out of roleplay due to just like various real life stuff going on and whatnot, quote unquote real life. Um, yeah, I guess that's kind of like the short of the long of it, I guess. Yeah.
Great. Do we want to
Hmm
also do a little short blurb on ourselves, Sylvan?
Want to? Yeah, I suppose it can. We can keep it short. Hi, I'm Silent. I've been around VR role for almost 3 years now, and yeah, I don't know. I've played in a couple of role plays, run a couple of role plays, kind of seen some of the sites, certainly not all of them, and yeah, that's about it.
I feel like before I start introducing myself, I do feel like the more we kind of introduce ourselves, the more I feel like we have to like kind of find something new to like talk about ourselves and what we've done, and like at some point we're just gonna
Eh.
start throwing out some wild shit, you know. I just have that feeling. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just me.
I mean, there's always a possibility that people are listening out of order. So,
Oh, true.
you know,
Yeah,
they could be starting here.
they could be, and this is a great place to start. So
Yeah.
good job, you listener who just started here. Proud of
Yeah.
you. All right.
Thanks for listening to me. That means a lot.
We value you and your contribution.
We value you and your contribution.
So, a short intro of myself. I'm Solus. I have been around the roleplay community since I think early 2020 as well. And I have played in a lot of roleplays in a bunch of different capacities, from player to NPC to supporting cast, whatever have you, and have kind of transitioned to doing more theory crafting and thoughts on design and such, which brought us here. All right. And that being said, the topic of today is safety. And this one, like we've kind of hinted at, is extremely important, right? Just looking at a very high level, roleplay is an activity, a social activity where we, as players, kind of suspend this like idea of like the personal, right? Like who we are, to become someone or something else, and that alone is an activity that can be very vulnerable. So you have these sort of concerns, like how do you separate between yourself and the character, or others and their characters? What kind of emotions can come out of this, especially if you're leaving an intense scene? All that kind of stuff. That there are tools to kind of recognize, work with those, and kind of facilitate those discussions around how we create this sort of like really intense and meaningful experiences without compromising anything about our own personal comfort or safety in the process. So this is kind of the core of the focus of why safety is super important, is because this at least thinking of this is necessary to kind of have that sort of community of trust and framework to actually facilitate that. Because otherwise, you sort of have this situation where people are trying to kind of calibrate and understand where the meter is on like how far they can go, and usually that gets set by the person who has the most flexible boundaries, right? So that tends to be people trying to catch up and making themselves usually a bit uncomfortable to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would say today's, I don't know if we want to call it episode. I guess it's an episode.
Discussion. Today's discussion.
Today's
Yeah.
discussion. Okay, that's good. All right. Yeah, I would say that today's discussion is intended as somewhat of a critique of the current state of the VR roleplay community.
Mhm.
Or at least I use community in very loose terms. There's a lot of roleplay that goes on in VR chat, and like we probably don't know about like half of it, right? So I use community here in very loose terms to mean the role plays that we're aware of in around this space. But in any case, it is currently June of 2024, and I would say that I personally have not really seen a role play that has had a or like any like longer term role play that has had any like serious consideration put into safety.
Yeah.
Like it might exist, right? Like I'm not going to say that it doesn't exist, but out of all the role plays that I have seen, which is quite a few, I have not seen a single one do that, and this includes the role play that I helped run, which was Worlds Apart. If I were to go back and kind of like change one thing about like how we ran it would probably be this, in particular. Um, and so yeah, so this discussion is very much intended to be a critique of the current state of the community, for that reason. Throughout the discussion, we might actually we intend to bring up some personal anecdotes here and there. And I suppose I do want to say ahead of time that it's not so much to point fingers, because honestly, like if we're talking about pointing fingers, I'm currently pointing fingers at literally everyone, uh,
Yeah.
including myself. I think this is something that we need to do better on. But I think that's enough intro, and we can probably start talking about safety rather than just talking around it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I think a good way we can kind of like start this is like talking, just like kind of reading the principle itself. What do you
Mhm.
think? Yeah.
Sure, we can probably like go a bit and then discuss and then read a bit more and then or do you want to read it all at once?
Well, let's do a bit then discuss. I think that's the way.
All right, yeah, let's go.
Okay. So, this is me reading the Couchform principle. Safety enables intensity verbatim, and then we're gonna kind of stop and discuss some parts. If you guys want to read along yourself, I actually made the command this time. So the
Let's
Google
go.
Doc in that
We got a
message right there.
command.
Yeah. The doc in that message
Wow.
right there is the Couchform principles. Number 3 is safety enables intensity, and that's exactly what we're discussing today. So, the basically the first paragraph is like our first big talking point. It is has actually been talked about a lot even prior to thinking of safety as like the core of like many different aspects of roleplay. So I think this is something very worth discussion. Is trust. We begin by saying trust is incredibly important for roleplay. As a collaborative activity, we depend on trust to explore interesting ideas with each other. Developing a culture of safety and transparency enhances that trust, enabling more intense drama than otherwise possible. And this next part is in bold. Trust is not implied, it is cultivated. So let's just talk about trust. I want to see what you two what your thoughts are on just the word itself, right? Like what does trust mean to you two?
I think in like the context of like RP, trust is really like your ability to like see another role player and know that like outside of the confines of your sort of like character, you can rely on their behavior to be like you could rely on their behavior to help guide you in either like a scene or just with like the broader role play at hand, even if you're not interacting with somebody. um yeah, that's kind of the short of it. I can go into more later. Silent.
Mhm. Um, so I've I'll use a word here. Specifically, when you enter into a role play, when you're participating in a role play, there is a implicit agreement between all the participants of the role play that we're here, we're playing a game, we're here with each other and we're playing a game. And this in I suppose like other literature for like rituals and such, this concept is actually known as like um, there's the magic circle and then there's the alibi. The alibi is the set of agreements, right? Social agreements that you make with your other players that we're here, we're telling a story together, and we're going to take this seriously, right? We're going to or as seriously as it needs to be taken, And if that alibi or if that trust is violated, you can't have a game. It's literally the concept of role playing is predicated on the fact that we make this agreement together. And if somebody breaks that, right, somebody um, let's say hypothetical, right? You're in the middle of the role play and like somebody starts like making fun of you for role playing all of a sudden, right? Like that's a very, extreme and silly example that I don't know, probably, or I mean, hopefully hasn't happened. But the game falls apart if that trust is broken. So that's really what trust is to me, is this agreement that we enter into to even have a role play in the first place.
I think of note actually is like the fact that you can actually, there are role plays where that sort of agreement falls apart completely, and there is like this broader sort of like denigration of like the people who perform and like play within it. And these role plays are still happening, to the the detriment, I would say, of the people who participate in them. Just because there is this sort of like manipulated level of like consent and like play for these people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is like super broad level, right? Trust is just like you have some basis of expectation of another person, whether it's a social contract or the goodwill of collaborative activities of any kind, and it is the belief that this person will act in accordance to those expectations, right? In the very practical sense, if you enter in a scene with another person, you want to be able to trust that they will play out this scene with you, right? That if you two both want something interesting to happen, that you can look to each other with some basis of belief that you two will both act toward that common goal. And this is
Absolutely.
yeah, and this is something that's not implied at all. You can't. I think there has been this kind of longstanding culture of like wanting players to be able to say that they trust each other implicitly, in the sense of like if I'm in a role play and I've just entered it and I see that these people are role playing a certain way, then I have to implicitly trust that they will also bring me into that, and that's not necessarily true. There's been kind of this long-standing culture of trying to push that instead of kind of actually filling in the gap that is definitely there. That is the framework that helps cultivate that trust.
I would add, even if it is true, right? Even if you can trust every single person in the role play, it will still be helpful to cultivate that trust, right? Because even if you can trust every single other person in the role play, well, how do you know that, right? And you do that by cultivating the trust.
Yeah.
That's how you get to that point. So it's not just about like, oh, what if somebody breaks that trust? It's about being comfortable and knowing that you're in an environment where trust has been built up.
Right.
And also like just having the ability to like rely on like sort of what's the phrase, meta, like what's, I'm like blanking on the phrase, but like these sort of like extra diegetic behaviors that you can do to like signal to somebody, like
Metamechanics?
yeah, meta mechanics, thank you, yeah, like like goodness gracious, or like oh please, and being able to like both not only like disengage from perhaps a scene that you have like an established sort of relationship outside of the context of like RP, and like you would normally feel comfortable with, but also being able to like escalate something with somebody that you would actually like, you don't actually know this person outside the context of RP, or like, maybe this is the first time you're meeting them, but like, you're like, say like you're in a scene with them, and they're doing something that you're interested in, and like, they hit you with like the oh please or whatever, in order to like want that from you, and like, you're cool with it or whatever. um
Yeah, and
Mm.
for those that aren't familiar, what Beef just kind of what Beef talked about there is an escalation and de-escalation mechanic,
yeah.
which is used pretty widely in LARPs to be able to signal pretty much in real time whether people want to escalate a scene to make it more intense, or to de-escalate it and either change topics in the scene, or just kind of drop it all together and move to something else. These mechanics have these sort of like action response sort of like sort of pieces to them, but they can also be just used very proactively. Uh, and historically they've been like very useful in helping people kind of understand, how do I know if I can explore this thing in a scene? How do I kind of trust? Here's that word again. That if I do explore this, that the other person isn't in distress and it's just their character that is. Because some people are very, very convincing when they're acting, and if they're like acting out distress, how do you, as the like person behind the character, look at that and trust in the situation that they are indeed acting and not, in distress themselves? And that's, I guess, kind of looking at trust as like not just a person to person thing always, but like also a person to situation, like seeing a situation and being able to understand that, you as the person behind the character can trust that the situation is not distressful to the people involved, and that you can explore the things that you want to without having to worry any further, because you've already done the necessary work to make sure of it.
Yeah, like I think like I'll call myself out here. I know that like in character before I have discussed like, other people dying of like opiate addiction, and like, that's just like a reality of living in America, is like just like knowing these kinds of people, like, depending if they're just like, somebody you knew from high school, or like maybe your like brother or like best friend or something. And like, for me to kind of have like done that with some other players, which were in the moment, they were all fine with it. But like, to knowing that like I've just kind of like done that without having been like, kind of trying to broach it using some sort of meta mechanic, is like, that's just like a good way to potentially trigger and ruin somebody's day, beyond just kind of like the sort of vagaries of character bleed that could just occur to somebody from playing a sort of like complicated character, or like one who has like a lot of like in character stress, that just is not like, discussing opiate addiction as a like quote unquote normal person in a fantasy setting.
Mm. Otan here mentioned this, says communicating as the player through the character to the other players. I think that kind of like
Yeah,
sums up like the meta mechanics that we were talking about. Um,
exactly.
I can say I'm going to save the anecdotes for after we make it through the what is it, the principle, but because I have some long ones that I want to talk about eventually. But
Okay.
I do but I do want to say that that communication, right? It there I have not been in any more stressful situation than being unsure of how other players are feeling, because we're in character, we're role playing, we're acting, and like being unsure if the other person is okay. I have not been in any more stressful situation in my time role playing. And on the other hand, right, on the flip side of that, I've had some of the most like satisfying scenes that I've participated in were those scenes where we were going through something, or we were going through some like really intense like emotional stuff, but I knew for a fact, I knew for a fact that not only that the other player, no, not their character, but the other player wanted to be there and explore those scenes with me. And those were some of the best scenes that I've had. Whereas some of the worst scenes that I've participated in were the ones where I was unsure. Um, so yeah, that communication is really really important. And well, it's one of the things, communication is one of the things that we have listed as essential. So
Yep.
I think that like one I always think of kind of like the comparison for these sorts of like uh levels of trust and like safety is like we have to rely on these tools because like in the moment, like obviously we're improvising like 90 to 95% of the stuff we do. I don't know, like completely ballpark, kind of bull crap estimate, I don't really know. But like in comparison to something like like theater, I because that's just like my background. Like you have like weeks of like rehearsing and developing your relationship with these other actors and performers and like crew members that you ultimately have to trust in order to do your performance and like do your job to like present a character accurately on stage. And being able to deploy like a safety tool is just more or less your ability to like not 100% bypass that sort of thing, but like get to a level where you can like start to actually you know cultivate trust with other people in your role play.
man, it's all too easy to just like, you were talking about like, the theater and like getting to know people. It is all too easy to role play with somebody for like months or even years and like not actually know who they are. That is, I suppose, not a ideal situation to be in, but like I've certainly heard of people in that situation, and
Yeah.
it's all too easy to fall into that
Yeah,
situation.
I can
I
already think of several
I
examples.
yeah, I don't think like it's necessarily a bad thing because it's like like if you like nobody has to you know
Of course, of
be
course.
be friends with everybody or like enjoy or engage in all the same things. But I think to like it, I don't like Penn and Teller, but I like the sort of like comparison of this their kind of relationship to this, wherein it's like there are two guys who just kind of they just work together and that's really it. And like they just have this sort of stage presence because they've just worked together and like they can trust each other within this sort of business relationship. Or like the Mythbusters, like that's kind of like a famous business relationship sort of thing. Like Adam and Jamie never really knew each other. Obviously none of these people are like, friends or anything. Or like, they're not role players, excuse me, but like it's like that sort of thing.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's like visibly from the outside, it could just look like, stage chemistry, right? Like these people work well with each other because they have, similar personalities. But in reality, a lot of that is also the trust behind it. Like how do you kind of build that kind of foundation?
Well,
Just to like,
yeah.
I guess just to expand on a point I made earlier, I kind of made this in passing, but the fact that it's already kind of in the discussion, this like particular word, trust, it's actually been around for a few years in the context of Fractured Thrones, and I wanted to bring this up because I thought it was a very a very foundational point within the combat style that they use. And I think it was Lone Complex that brought it up first. Is that combat in a sort of very collaborative theatrical sense does not work without trust, right? And that was kind of the core of the conversation around how that style works. What my critique would be in that sense, and what was missed, is like, okay, well, how does that happen? How do you get to the point where trust is built? Like, how do we cultivate that? So we've talked very high level about like how that actually happens, but we haven't like I think dived into it too much. So we can start trying to do that by continuing here. And before we do, I just want to also once again I keep finding myself having to do this. Maybe I need like a disclaimer on the screen or something, but just to say if anyone wants to comment or ask questions at any point within any of the chat channels that we have, whether it's the podcast channel or the Twitch chat, y'all are free to do so anytime.
Yeah, please feel free. We're just sitting here aboard this couch as we sail haphazardly through the skies on this questionable parachute.
Yeah, it'll be a very, very long time before we reach the ground. So we have a couple hours.
I promise we will try to steer the couch to a Popeyes. I promise you.
Oh, God, I've never tried Popeyes, and now I really want.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah,
I'm missing out.
One day. So I'm going to go ahead and keep reading through this. So by exploring strong themes, we open the door to more intensity. Without a safety framework, the player with the most flexible boundaries sets the expectation for a roleplay's intensity. The remaining participants are then expected to push their limits to maintain immersion and keep the story moving. This design caters to players who do not personally experience distress and encourages others to endure it. I'm going to continue. Do you want to comment?
Oh yeah, I was gonna say I the term flexible is like very like it's funny because like my immediate thought isn't like, you know, the person with the most flexible boundaries is actually like somebody who is like passively assuming this role, but really it would be like the player with like the most authority, or like the most like kind of like you know, the most power within a space ultimately would also be the one to establish that sort of expectation, which I think is very you know, very interesting.
Yeah.
But you obviously, there's obviously like another paragraph here, right?
That's the I suppose that's the implicit agreement versus the explicit. I suppose if you had power, then you would need like explicit rules to establish that, right? This is if you don't have those rules in place, then it's implicitly whoever has the highest.
Yeah, whoever has the
highest
ability,
tolerance.
whoever has the ability to act on and influence the intensity of the scene around them, which it does depend on the project. I mean, for the people that have the authority, they have like kind of open reign to do so. And depending on how the project is run, players may or may not kind of have the ability to do so, depending on what they can actually interact with, right? So the next paragraph after that ties right into it. Kind of coming from this idea of the design catering to players who do not personally experience distress and encouraging others to do it. This is clearly unhealthy and potentially dangerous. While we believe that no roleplay is for everyone, we want to enable high intensity without marginalizing players or sheltering them from the themes we want to explore. Okay, very, very strong stance there that we want to make. And there are a couple of points to this, right? We want to make it very clear that this pattern is an unhealthy pattern. If we do not have a sort of framework to navigate these sorts of dynamics, we do end up with people kind of trying to push their boundaries to keep up and to keep pace. And a lot of times the kind of goal and the focus is like, we got to keep things moving. We got to keep the story moving at the pace it's already going. And that, for a lot of people, can be very distressing, depending on the intensity of the roleplay.
So I must ask, did any of you do your homework? Because I'm about to do a direct quote here.
We had homework.
Oh, sorry.
Oh my God!
You
I
weren't
feel like
here,
I'm
so
in
you get a free pass. But everybody who was here. All right, I'm about to quote that video that I assigned as homework last week. So you know, this is the test. essentially the vocal minority, right? Those who are the most invested, the most involved in a community. It is those players who expect that their comfort zone is the norm, and they also expect that any people entering into the community are going to eventually learn to share their comfort zone, as opposed to changing their own behavior. As this is a expectation that is all too common, and I think kind of is part of what we're saying here. If you allow for people to, right, if we don't have any sort of structure to enforce safety, enforce kind of comfort and safety, then you're going to allow essentially your players or your participants to figure it out for themselves, and then it's going to be those who have been there kind of the longest, who are the most comfortable, who have like the broadest, I suppose, or the loosest comfort zones, to essentially dictate to other people what their comfort zone should be. And if somebody comes into the community and they don't match, right? If they don't already match that that level of comfort, they will either suffer and stick around, or be essentially alienated from the community. And I think both of those options are not ideal.
I'm sorry, I'm just like trying to process the mental gymnastics that it takes to like be in that position of like community authority or like community seniority, and somehow trying to make the case that like people coming in that are fresh and don't understand anything about the group would then just openly talk about their boundaries.
Well,
like that's
well, no.
I'm like I get what you're saying. It's like the that would have effectively been the
So no.
expectation.
So I suppose that's not entirely what I'm saying. This is
Okay.
not like
Sorry.
this is I think generally like there is usually no malice involved, and in fact there's
Yeah.
usually not too much thinking about this involved. Like it's just something that's just of course, these things are okay, these things that we're doing, of course this behavior is okay, everybody around me thinks these behaviors are okay, therefore they must be okay, right? And if you're surrounded by, you know 20, 30, 40 people who all share your comfort zone and they all share your boundaries, and you all are on the same wavelength, then yeah, of course it feels natural that the sort of behaviors that you take part in are okay.
Yeah.
They're okay in your small circle, right? And yes, it doesn't matter if you can be surrounded by 40 people who all share, your same wavelength. It's still your small circle, right? That those behaviors, those things that you're used to, your comfort zone, is not universal and is not going to be shared. Even it's not going to be universally shared amongst everybody, even if those behaviors are okay amongst your group. It just won't mesh well with people from outside the group. And I'm not even talking like new role players here. Like that's not even what I'm talking here. I literally just mean anyone who's not sort of in who hasn't already been introduced to the culture that you are a part of.
Yeah.
Right. This does not necessarily just mean new role players. This means literally anybody who is just not part of the same culture.
Mm-hmm. I do want to clarify, for the sake of like talking about these sorts of like anecdotes and examples, I fully agree in the sense of like it is very, very rare for these cases of like lack of safety going wrong that there's any malice in it whatsoever. A lot of times it is either just some form of neglect or ignorance, or something that just kind of got missed down the line, or even people like trying to act in a positive, like good faith manner toward trying to like make spaces and ending up kind of brushing along the wrong shoulders. Like these are very, very common things to go wrong, even if you're not trying to do anything bad, which it can be frustrating, absolutely. Which is why the discussion that we want to start is to talk about, like, how can we make this better if we are
Mhm.
kind of building, like how do we kind of design better for these sorts of needs for safety, to to account for these sorts of situations that come
Mhm.
up.
And I suppose as an addendum to the how, if you want, right, if you want people who are entering into your community, right, if you want those people to eventually share your comfort zone, right, because you probably want more people that are, involved in role play, and kind of like involved in this high intensity role play, right, like we certainly advocate for that sort of thing. If you want that, if you want more people to role play with in the way that you want, the way you're not going to have that is if you scare people away, right? The way you're going to get there, the way you're going to have people and kind of integrate them into the culture, is by temporarily caving to, or like essentially catering to their comfort zone. And then eventually, slowly over time, right, as people get, build that trust together, people will probably over time open up and be more receptive to trying different and new things. And that's how you get to that point, right? That's how you essentially make sure that you are able to get to that point, with others. You make each other comfortable first, and then you can um, do the exploration and the role play that you want to.
Hmm. And I'll skip forward just a little bit to talk
Hmm.
about a very relevant point on that too. Is when we're thinking about like kind of exploring where that equilibrium is. Roleplay at its very core is an exploration of boundaries, right? It is kind of
Yeah.
navigating those sorts of boundaries and understanding what makes us comfortable or uncomfortable in a given scenario, and kind of working and navigating those effectively with each other. Uh, Boundaries are very different from limits. Boundaries can be explored and or negotiated, and limits are completely hard stop, for lack of a better term, limits to a player's comfort in a given situation. Limits should never be exceeded. Right.
Yep.
Just want to make that point
Whew.
super super clear, because I think I want to make sure there's no like misconstruing here when we do talk about like player comfort, that there isn't just like a rigid wall and that's the only wall that there ever is, and we can't do anything else, and then suddenly we're doing the thing where we kind of just shelter each other. The point of safety is to open up the space and to
You know
allow
what?
us
I
to move more.
realize I realize we haven't discussed the title, right? We started reading this thing. We haven't discussed the title, which is
Yeah,
safety enables intensity.
yeah, enables.
Yeah, we should probably do that, right? So yeah, I guess we've segued into the title here. Yeah, so safety enables intensity, right? I will actually repeat, just for the sake of anybody who wasn't here for the first discussion on the first week. The way I like to think about safety, and also I suppose the reason we are currently um, floating in the air via parachute. Um, the way I like to think about it, there is a sort of fun statistic, right? If you think about modes of travel, you might think about skydiving, and I certainly have never been skydiving. I certainly never want to be skydiving because that feels dangerous, and I would be terrified. That's not for me, right? Um, but if you look at the statistics for skydiving, um, skydiving is actually statistically safer than commercial like flying, which is already I believe like the safest mode of transportation. Like for getting from point A to point B, certainly significantly safer than driving, like by a long shot. And people drive every day, but if you compare the sort of the rate of like accidents or fatalities or literally anything that you want between driving and skydiving wins by literally every metric. But at the same time, right, you can kind of like back off and be like, okay, throwing yourself out of a plane at the ground, like that's a pretty dangerous activity, right? So like what gives, right? And what gives is that, well, flying in an airplane is already incredibly regulated. But you best bet that companies that take people skydiving, you best bet that they are investing like every bit into the safety of those people as possible, because once again, flying is already incredibly heavily regulated, but then on top of that, right, like skydiving companies are going to make absolutely sure that there are like a billion redundancies in place at all points in time. And that level of safety is what enables skydiving to be safer than flying and significantly safer than driving a car. In a sense, the safety enables people to do an otherwise really, really dangerous activity. I don't know. I certainly wouldn't recommend skydiving without all those safety precautions in place. So that's the way that I conceptualize safety and safety culture in roleplay. We implement these systems to be able to do more in our role plays.
Sorry, I'm just silently nodding because that's
Yeah,
it's like
that's mine.
that's why we chose the title, right? It's because we're not trying to truncate. We're not trying to limit the content. We're trying to what?
Okay, Otan. Fun fact, says Otan. Per mile traveled, elevators are the safest form of transport. Okay, I did not know that. I suppose I don't know where that is.
In the
in any
elevator
case,
podcast, elevator form. Sorry, I'm sorry. I just.
All right, I'm writing elevator form right now.
I certainly know that. Yeah. In any case, the skydiving versus flying is definitely a statistic. Even though, right, like why in the world should skydiving be safer than just commercial flights?
I mean, even if you
yeah.
think like super baseline infrastructurally, like having tall buildings, right? Having skyscrapers, those wouldn't have been possible without like the like decades, centuries of like engineering knowledge that went into making these really super safe structures and materials that built the building so you can go up to the 50th floor. Like that's it's all things we just don't think about. But they facilitate our lives every single day. Kind of wild when you put it into perspective. I do want to pose a potentially difficult question to you two. No, for the sake of like just really thinking about this, and I can answer first if it'll take a while for you two. But I want you two to think of like a situation. Like what's a situation where you potentially missed out on exploring something because you knew there wasn't something to like some safety framework that you could kind of use with it to kind of ensure that it would go well. And I guess I can start. And this is what Cylin knows because she's actually the subject of this.
I see. I was that's exactly what came to mind. So go ahead.
Okay.
I'll try to think of something else.
All right, I will steal your answer.
That's exactly what came to mind.
I will steal your answer. So let me see if I remember the name of the LARP. Do you remember the name? Something at the maximum volume. Listening at the maximum volume. That's what it was. Quite a while back, Cylin and I and Abiz and Zoe, I believe, participated in this small, basically council LARP called Listen to the Maximum Volume, which is effectively about these band members that were part of a famous band a long time ago and have effectively kind of past their prime. They disbanded like 15 years ago, and they were just now reconvening because someone brought them together. And in this case, it was my character who was the drummer and had basically fallen on like really hard times, but was like the rowdy and impulsive and riskier member of the group, who was basically bringing everyone together because he was having his own financial problems, and or he was just like missing his kind of crazier times and time in the spotlight. So he brought everyone else together in kind of this like selfish fashion. And in his like urges to get people on board, he would kind of ask them about their lives and like what they've been doing and how it's like super lame compared to like, you know, when they were famous. And it was this whole like thing. Like my character was the one pushing it, so I was the one that was kind of like tasked with like in a sense like leading this conversation, like pushing, you know, what the reality of it was and like what happened. And at some point like this topic came up about like the party, right? Like this something happened that kind of was the straw that broke the camel's back, and they decided to disband because of potentially some personal strife. And we kind of had this like 2-2 split at some point, where Biz and Zoe with their characters went to the kind of the outside to the street to kind of talk about things, and then Scylla and I ended up kind of discussing still inside the bar where the LARP was situated, and we had this like moment of like being in this personal conversation between our characters where we had the whole gamut of possible ideas to explore. And because we had kind of zeroed in on this sort of like something bad happened and it broke us apart kind of idea, I immediately thought we could do some really heavy shit with this. Like we could explore things like potential very heavy like drug use or like abuse or potential like relationship issues. We could have explored a lot of topics, but like in the moment, I think both Scylla and I were thinking about this and thinking about all the things that we could do and thinking this could potentially be potentially be distressful, and we had not discussed a way to navigate it. And with each other, in my thoughts, like I was thinking in the moment, like I know Selen would be able to kind of like impromptu facilitate a sort of like in place safety kind of situation if we were to just have our one-on-one scene, figure it out, and then move on. But the problem then became, what if the other two come back? Now we're in this 4-person scene where we have brought up this potentially distressful idea and topic that now we have to kind of expand that and kind of expect that people are on the same page. And we can't exactly expect that if we don't have these sort of tools to work with it to begin with. So we basically like ended up not being able to do that for the sake of like not wanting to risk being bringing something distressing into the scope of the LARP, which if we had talked about it earlier and thought about like, you know, what if something like that comes up, how do we handle that? Then I think we would have absolutely been able to do that very easily. Would have definitely enabled some very, very intense story that like we kind of had this whole session, this whole scenario where it kind of was very surface level, very much like everyone was kind of holding back for a reason in character. Like everyone was kind of like trying not to think about the past, even though they did have like the best success in their lives from like a very you know like financial perspective, from a very like you know celebrity focused media kind of perspective. But like there's a big reason why they're not thinking about it, and like that could have been the thing, but we just like didn't have the tools to do that.
Yeah, it's like teeing up for kind of like, you know, the big, you know, like the big move for all the players to make for their characters to really like have that sort of like narrative satisfaction, and then you just can't even follow up on it because like it's like you can't, if one person wants to do drug abuse and the other person wants to do like sexual abuse, or like another person wants to do like I don't know, like even like financial like manipulation or whatever, or like embezzlement or something, like nobody can actually like do any of these sorts of like things if you don't just like have like a brief second to kind of lean into it, or like lean into it with like this these sort of like meta mechanics at play.
Yeah, or even just to have them. Like, if it would be even okay if like we didn't have like the in session lead in of like this is what happens, and like a Biz and Zoe come back to like us suddenly talking about that. If they also had the tool to say they want to calibrate in the moment, like if they came back in and had this sort of realization of, oh, this role play is very clearly leaning in a direction that I feel very uncomfortable with, and they have that sort of like calibration of saying, okay, I kind of am not comfortable with this, I want to explore something else, then we could just have that, right? And that would like basically allow us to be able to kind of trust the scenario. If it is not being used to steer the conversation elsewhere, then we trust that people are personally measuring their own comfort, and that the total comfort of the scene is fine, and that we can continue and explore these kind of very intense situations.
I think for me, Solus, if you don't mind me kind of like taking the wheel here.
Go for it.
Go ahead.
Drive.
I think for me, like one of the characters I've enjoyed the most, and who I'll probably like will never like really play again. Maybe I do, obviously in like some other form, but for the ATK RP, which was the BattleTech RP that ran a little while ago. Obviously, we didn't have any tools for that. And at the beginning, it was a pretty interesting role play, but it really felt like that I was kind of being more or less put into these sort of like stories, not at like my own behest, but at the behest of others. And so even to kind of like go for like a more like general explanation, because like to tell you the truth, like I had a great time the time that I did have, but the stories like that I was like kind of being set up for were like like yeah, like I am this kind of like sleeper agent for what other sort of like organization that's like contra to the involvement of like the people on the ship, without getting into like the vagaries of like lore or whatever. And that's like good and fun, but I ultimately it was the case that like these sorts of like story beats or whatever, and this is like I think just like an example more of like something that isn't even like like, oh, we're talking about something distressing, but rather like we're not like I'm not going to like play ball with the stuff that like I want to really be playing ball with, you know what I mean? And like my like sort of like comparative inability with like these sorts of like stories is just in relation to like my I don't really have like agency to like interact with them or whatever. It's a bummer, because like I really enjoyed this character. I I wanted more out of this character. Ultimately it was like circumstances out of my own control that like kind of made me stop playing the character, just like real life stuff, like housing issues and whatnot. But I think even if I had played through it, I would have just like been like, this character was cool and all, I really liked this character, I had some good moments, and I like still do now. But I didn't get to do the sort of stuff that I wanted to do, because I wasn't getting to even do the things like perform the kind of like role play that I wanted to do. There's like we're not talking about like the kind of like softer boundaries that like I wanted to do. Like this is just like stuff that's like very, very simple, like, simple sort of stuff where it's like I'm not having fun anymore in this sort of regard. Like, when I think about it in past, like you're kind of having fun in the moment because like role play is like kind of fun, but like really you're not, because it's like I'm not really getting to do what I want to do. Um, I think does that kind of like make sense with everybody here?
Yeah,
I just
yeah.
want to. Okay, cool. I just
I'm
want to make sure.
I'm like kind of getting. I do want to know like what kind of stuff were you trying to do?
Well, so like the idea for her was that like she's like a reporter for like a news agency.
Okay.
She's the only civilian on the ship. And I guess like I kind of want to go for it for like this more slice of life sort of aspect. You have the one civvy on this ship full of like military men. Um, and then like I get hit up with like by the DM saying like, hey, would you want to do this? Kind of like be this sort of like kind of like pushing the main plot kind of a deal. And I said, yeah, because like I just wanted my character in, you know what I mean? But really, like, it's it's interesting, to have this sort of like clandestine sort of aspect to it where like I'm actually like facilitating, that sort of angle. Where like I have to, report to like my higher ups about the nitty-gritty that's going on. So my higher ups know like what sort of like, you know, like sci-fi cool stuff is happening for like their own personal gain. Again, not to get into like too much of the vagaries of the lore. Um, but like it's sort of just like stuff like that where it's like you can't even like disengage from that like in the moment, because like you'll have like some sort of like thing like that. I guess this is probably more to the point of like you know not being able to you're not given the ability to like say no to these like sort of like opportunities or whatever. i
Mhm.
guess i guess this is
So it's
probably
like the
more of like,
communication.
yeah, it's like the communication, and I guess
Hmm.
like something that's a little more structural, just because like there's not a lot of like role plays that happen, I guess, in the VR space, in the broader scheme of things. At least like not a lot of role plays that like really put a lot of effort, that the role play was doing. Whether or not like disregarding the fact that maybe there were not maybe, but like there were issues in the end. You know,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah, no, I think I can relate to that. Like, it's kind of like the feeling, and I suppose here communication is like very integral to safety. It's very possible to feel stuck in a position in role play and feel like there's really not a lot you can do about it, or like nobody you can talk to about it. Or like you're in a situation and you're like, well, man, like I'm getting to do this stuff, but like it's really just like I'm not really vibing with it, but like I also can't get out of the situation. Would that be accurate?
exactly. That's exactly what I mean.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Because I think I can resonate with that. Like I've definitely felt that before. Um,
I guess
and there it's not
yeah.
even like the content of the role play, right? It's kind of like the stuff surrounding the role play, like the fact that you can't, you know, reach out to somebody, or you feel like you can't reach out to somebody. That is the distressing part.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's the point that like it isn't just like this role play that has this issue. I would say it's like a number of other ones, both like past and present. And unfortunately more than likely future. But that was just like, you know, like kind of like my first big my first big interaction with like that sort of thing. If like that makes sense.
Hmm. I, I'll have one. I mean, I'm glad you shared that one, Beef, because I mean, I was like, I really wanted to like share examples, um, where it's not actually the content of the role play that's the part that leads to that feeling of like not being safe, or like not being comfortable. And like the next one, the example that I have is actually one like that too. It's actually there's a scene in Waypoint. I think you were there, Solus. Though I think this was before we had ever talked. There was like,
Mhm.
I actually don't know who the character involved was, because that's the only time that I ever saw them. And this is going to be a pattern of like, this is the only time I ever saw this person, never got to talk to them out of character. There was this sort of angel character in Waypoint, which is otherwise, it's this very cheerful sort of like fantasy town. I'm playing a tiny gremlin of a fairy that's kind of just like going around and like having fun. And like there was a and there was this angel character that was like I think they were specifically running away from Ordenfolio, and like I get like wind of
Oh
this,
no.
and I'm just like, oh yeah, hide and seek, let's go. So we're playing hide and seek now. We're like chasing after this person. They're not playing hide and seek, but we're playing hide and seek, right? And we did this for a little bit, but then like as time went on, like I vaguely remember the character was either, I actually don't know them, but they were like either mute or just like not really talking a lot. And it's not what you would expect out of like playing hide and seek, right? Like it's like a game. It's supposed to be fun. They were kind of just like really running away, and like as this like game of fake hide and seek like went on, I kind of got in my head of like, I actually don't know if this person is having fun like doing this. Like are they running away from us because like it's fun for them in character, or are they running away from us because they want to go and do other stuff in the role play, right? Like did they not, are they stuck in in this situation that they don't want to be in? So I kind of like thought to myself like, okay, well, I'm gonna chase them for a little bit longer, and then character is gonna get bored, and I'm going to just disengage and go do something else, right? And this is one of those things where like I have no idea to this day if like that was like a thing that that person was enjoying or not. Um, and this has, I can't imagine the, I mean I feel fairly confident that the game of hide and seek is not like some big trauma inducing event or something, but it doesn't have to be that, right? It could still be uncomfortable, could still be something, as Beef was saying, a situation that they're stuck in that they're not enjoying.
Yeah, I
um
think kind of like if you don't mind, like a very succinct and like maybe blunt way to put it is like, you know, like safety and like, trust, safety mechanics and like trust, like, it doesn't have to be like all like necessarily like of course, like, it is for the like, the more serious stuff, of course, right? But it can also just be for stuff that you just think kind of sucks in the
mhm,
moment. Like, it's just like, yeah, I don't want to play ball like this anymore. Like I want to go play like basketball instead or something. Like
mhm,
it doesn't have to be like, this sort of really traumatic, trauma RP sort of stuff, which I think is kind of like, um I don't want to say a trap because like, sort of stuff is like actively distressing and like, will ruin someone's day, maybe even week, if you just kind of bring it up, especially considering
mhm,
like how bleed affects people, and like nobody can avoid bleed, nobody.
Mhm.
um like it can just be kind of like, yeah, like, there kind of goes my Friday. Like, I wanted to do this, but I
mhm,
ended up being stuck in like jury duty RP or whatever. Like, yeah,
mhm.
just like stuff
um
like that.
they I suppose I would have been a lot more comfortable in that situation, like had I had, had I felt like there was a way, and like theoretically, I could have just like stopped the role play, paused and been like, "Hey, are you enjoying?" Right? I could have just broken character and asked them, right?
Yeah,
But
like
like
cards down.
there
Yeah.
there is like there is definitely like a pressure when you're role playing to not do that. There's like a strong pressure to not do that unless it's like important, like, and I guess maybe that's like at least a little bit part of the problem. But like realistically, I would have given, like, it would have been so much better if I had access in that moment to a sort of like escalation de-escalation mechanic where I could have just like very easily, not even needed to break the scene, like discreetly asked them like out of character, is this something you're enjoying? And if they're like, no, then I can make that decision to, to do something else, right? Or rather, they can like essentially tell me, right, that it's not, and then I can go do something else, right?
Yeah.
Or if they're like, man, I'm having a blast, right? I'm really enjoying this, then we can continue having the fun scene, right?
Yeah.
And the point is that like I don't have to make that decision blindly and like without knowing, right? Because like maybe they were having a blast and like I then ruined the scene by pulling out, right? Like who knows? I don't know. And I guess I'll probably never find out. So
I could like
but yeah.
help assuage your concerns if anything. Although you couldn't know in the moment, I did talk to, I think it was Miss Squeakers that played the character afterward in the debrief, and
This is where we're finding out.
yeah, and she did mention like what her thoughts were on it, and that what she was interested in doing there. She actually was like kind of interested in the whole like being scared of a person running away from them and then like gravitating towards someone else. So that was something that she was aiming for. So
okay, well, yeah, like I didn't know that, right? I had no way of knowing in that moment, right, without being like, okay, cards down, right? And that's usually reserved for like, or there's at least like a feeling of like that being reserved for like, things that you can't do without going cards down. Which I guess in this case is everything.
To kind of actually have like another anecdote now that I'm thinking about it is this is also during ATK. My character got arrested for like sneaking drugs aboard the ship, and I got interrogated briefly by one of like the head security officer or whatever, and like like my character's being like a little shit about it or whatever, and like the other player like he has his character blow up at me, and like I'm living for this, like I mute myself and I'm like, this rules, like I'm loving what he's like giving me, this is amazing, this is great. And like obviously like I respond back kind of like in character appropriately, I'm kind of like shocked about it, I'm like trying to keep my cool in character about it, but really like I'm having a great time. And of course, like afterwards, because this role player is a fantastic role player and like amazing. They came up to me and they were like, actually no, they shot me a DM. They were like, hey, like I just want to say like this it's just like like I hope that wasn't like too much or anything like that. Like or it didn't kind of like make you overloaded or whatever. Kind of like like aftercare sort of stuff, which is great. And I let them know like that's it was amazing and stuff. But like I could easily imagine a scenario where like somebody else who like isn't comfortable with that or like is gonna be like freaking the fuck out or whatever. Pardon my language. They're going to be they might not be cool with that, or like they might be really upset, or like maybe it's like, hey, like wasn't really comfortable with that or whatever. And like like a bit of toolkit would have helped out there, even for my partner's sort of like own benefit in the moments, that way like like, hey, you can go even harder than how you're currently going harder, and like that would be totally cool, I'll like let with like the sort of meta mechanic or something like that.
Yeah, and that's like it's like one of those examples, right? It's like things worked out well, and they could have gone even like more intense and better.
Yeah, they could have gone even more intense, or it could have gone really bad. But like it just happened to be the case that it kind of worked out well.
Yeah, exactly. I am curious, who was the role player?
That was Timeless, our one of the best role players I've ever had the experience with role playing with. I would say, yeah.
Timeless is great. Love that guy.
Timeless, my beloved, indeed.
True.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, these are all incredible examples, right? Like, just things can go well, things can go bad. The one of the worst things that we experience when doing this is like, if we are in one of those situations that we know can go one or the other way, not knowing is like stressful. right? So kind of I want to now dive into like what safety culture actually looks like, and we actually talked about a lot of these, so I will try to be brief because these are basically just examples. But what I do want to like preface it with is like what we have written in the principle itself are examples of like things that work within safety culture. But safety is an ever changing sort of environment that if you find a need, think about designing around it and like think about how things can be kind of accounted for and made better. But these are like the examples that we have currently. One is disclosure, right? Like thinking about how to kind of preface ideas that are going to be brought up within a setting, right? If you have a role play that's going to be centered around like, uh, you know, poverty and death, right, and famine and illness and stuff, like you preface that and say, this is what the game's about. This ties in so heavily with communication. Uh, you'll find that a lot of these kind of safety ideas and examples tie in very heavily with communication because you need to communicate effectively to create a safe environment. So disclosure is kind of the kind of upfront communication of like, this is what we expect to happen, but obviously roleplay is very chaotic and not what we expect pretty much all the time. We will have plans, and those plans won't survive first contact with the players, and then suddenly, things steer in our directions, and that's what we have everything else for, right? But if you've organized a roleplay or you've made a player, a character, and you have some intention of like things that will be explored that could potentially like be distressful, you talk about that, right? Like, this is what you should expect when interacting with this. This has definitely been around. This is, I think, one of those things that's like been done decently well. There have been content warnings on like scenes involving torture and potential dismemberment and such. Could definitely expand on like other types of scenes, but it has definitely been done before. And I think like, for any groups that are out there doing that thing, like continue it. Like that's a really good way to kind of ensure that anything that is, too potentially distressful can be like covered beforehand, so people are prepared.
Yeah.
Whether
And
they
I think
engage with it or not.
I think part of safety, right? Like part of safety, safety culture is definitely, that personal responsibility of, looking at a role play, looking at the information that's been put out about that role play and making that decision for yourself of like, is this something that, is right for me? Is this, are these topics something that, I am able to explore, right? There's definitely some personal responsibility involved here.
Mm-hmm.
If like you have let's say for example, you have a phobia and like somebody makes a role play that's going to like explicitly be exploring that phobia, maybe, right, uh, maybe you should, take that into consideration, right? There is some level of like personal responsibility here. Now, it is not the full picture though. It's certainly not the full picture, right? There is, we want our players and our participants to be able to make an informed decision about what role play like is right for themselves, but it's not only, right, that individual responsibility. And I suppose we should probably talk about like how we can work together um, to make things more inclusive and more accessible.
Mm-hmm. I do want to manifest at least a little bit that
Hmm.
my own belief is that the personal responsibility is the first responsibility, right? Like
Yeah.
you, as the player or as the staff or whatever capacity you work in a role play, you are the primarily responsible party for your own enjoyment of the role play. You are the first person. You are the most ultimate responsibility there is to whether or not you are having fun. And that is your goal, right? To have fun. Because obviously, why would you have a goal for anything else besides enjoying yourself and doing the thing? Well, like I think there's like a little bit of at least fear when talking about this, that sometimes it's like, well, I have to be responsible for everyone else, and I have to kind of, you know, coddle them or cradle them or protect them from other things like that. The idea is that if everyone has enough tools to be able to act on their own ultimate responsibility and to be able to navigate these sorts of situations while keeping everyone else in mind, that to me is the ideal. Right? That to me is the basis on which everyone can work together while still being the foremost agent of their own enjoyment of the experience. But it does absolutely require that sort of like collaborative effort to have those kind of tools in place, which is why safety is there. And I want to once again reiterate, again, we're not looking to like limit, we're looking to enable. Right. Otan does not play to win or uplift, she plays to hurt. Joking, of course. So the second thing, yes, the check-in. So this we have kind of prefaced a little bit earlier in some of those anecdotes. The check-in is the idea of having a sort of verbal or visual signal to check if other players are okay. So in LARP, a famous one is the OK hand. So people kind of put the OK hand up to kind of just in session without needing to otherwise kind of break character and full phrase ask them like how they're feeling and what's going on in their head. That they could just kind of throw an OK hand up, and then if the player responds affirmatively, I believe the response is an OK hand if they're doing fine. I actually don't remember fully, but if they respond affirmatively, then you can keep going. If they respond otherwise, if they thumbs down, or if they kind of shake their head or whatever the negative symbol is, they would basically signal that they are not doing okay in the scene and that the scene should change direction in some way. This is like basically like all these like some of these anecdotes that we talked about, like not being sure of like how everyone's doing within a scene and whether they have like the ability to say whether they're not enjoying a scene or feel uncomfortable within it. Like this tool alone would have remedied pretty much most of that, right? Like, because as soon as you introduce this tool into the roleplay, now you know that as the foremost primary agent in determining one's own enjoyment of a roleplay, that if someone did not use this tool, or if someone did not signal their non-enjoyment of a scene with this tool, then you can more easily trust that they are enjoying it. That being said, the check-in is often used as a from the perspective of the initiator, right? So it's not usually the person that is like in distress that is using it. The usual use case is that the person who is potentially introducing distressful situations or uncomfortable situations is the one using it, just to kind of see where the scene is at, where the players in it are at, and to kind of limits test the room, see that everything's okay, and then move on.
I'll add to that once again, because I think it goes even a bit further, right? It's like it's like we're people, and there's kind of the concept of empathy, and then kind of like worrying about other people, right? When I was jamming for Worlds Apart, gosh, I would have loved the sort of check-in mechanic that was not breaking the scene. I ended up calling cards down for some people, like quite a bit. Like whenever there was somebody that like was sitting alone for like you see them sitting alone once and you're like, okay, and you see them still sitting alone like half an hour later, I would go in and be like, okay, cards down. Are you okay? And like, it's always like the feeling of like having to do that in like such a way, because like you don't know um if maybe they're like having this like really like cool scene play out in their head of like thinking thoughts and character, and I'm going and like interrupting that, right? So it was really it was really hard to break those people out of those scenes. And most of the time it turned out that they were perfectly fine and enjoying themselves, like being alone, or at least that's what was being communicated. Um, but like sitting there and watching that, even as a GM, even as somebody who's like not part of the scenes, right? Like it's kind of hard not to worry for other people. It's kind of I feel like I feel like it's a natural thing to do. So it's not even necessarily the person who's like you know, initiating something, right? That would probably be more suitable for like an escalation mechanic, which is next. But it's just like you are witnessing a scene or like something happening, right? You're witnessing the scene, and you yourself are fine, but you just want to make sure, you just want to check up on other people, and it's really for your own comfort, because you want to make sure that you're not hurting others. And that's, I think, a very valid concern to have.
Mm-hmm. And there's like, I'm gonna potentially dial it up a bit if it's okay with you too.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's also, just thinking further on this, like the notion of like saying that you're not enjoying something is very, very difficult to do without being prompted. Even thinking from like a very large community perspective, like that kind of idea is very alienating, because when we think about roleplay, when we think about like having this collaborative fun, we're thinking, okay, well, we're all enjoying ourselves, we're all having fun, no one is showing discontent. That means that we're all sharing this enjoyment, we're all happy. And saying otherwise is like being the dissenter, the negative voice of a space that says, I'm actually not having fun, and this is why. That in some cases has like even alienated me from like whole ass communities, because like I have pinpointed a thing that is potentially like uncomfortable to me, and or made it very hard for me to enjoy the experience, and that like sometimes the response to that is very much like, we made this to have fun with friends, and you're imposing something on us that we have absolutely no intention of accommodating. Where my ask in the specific case I'm talking about, it was legitimately just, if you have someone kind of helping out with your project in like a supporting capacity, give them enough information to work with, right? I had a lot of questions, and my only feedback was basically to say, more help, more info would be nice, because we all have different styles. So, kind of by skipping the like actual structure of like what's expected of people in a given kind of role play, like for example, how this role play runs modules. Module is a term that is very ambiguous, right? That alone is like, I need to ask this question, right? And that's all structural, that's all informational, it's all communication. But in the end, bringing up that it was an issue with my experience was basically what was like socially not accepted in that given circumstance, and it led to me leaving, because there was a very large lashback, because I said, maybe we should bring some of that information more up front. And that's like just an example of like, I recognized a potential issue to my experience here, and that could have been mitigated. That kind of response is like a fear for a lot of people. It's like, I'm the one not enjoying this, and it's a valid fear. It's like, if you don't have that sort of like ability to very structurally say that there's something wrong, that something can be improved on and can be made better, and that you are in fact not actually enjoying it as much as you see others are, then how do you bring that up, right? There has to be a way, because otherwise it really is up to like whatever sort of design that that becomes like the social norm, that people kind of like implicitly assume is there, and that implicit assumption is very much led again by those people that have been there long enough. So for like new people especially, this is extremely hard to kind of, I don't want to say assimilate, but it really does feel like that, to kind of like blend into that sort of mindset. Like, if you're just not enjoying yourself before you get to that point, then you know are you just out of luck?
Um, I actually have like a personal anecdote here from like the really beginning, like when I first started doing roleplay. Um, this one I suppose has, has a happy ending, but like, this was me. I hop in. This was a Purple Lotus, specifically the Lotus Garden. So that was the European session. This was during my like 2-month binge of Purple Lotus, in response to advice from the community. And so I hop into like Lotus Garden. I go around and talk to some people. I'm like having a pretty good time, and all of a sudden, I just then turn around and there's this bedsheet ghost cat just going meow, like that, right? Uh, and to anybody who doesn't know, the ghost cat character is played by the lovely Captain Panda. They're a wonderful person, absolutely wonderful, and they're playing this character. Literally, it's just a bedsheet ghost of a cat that's just going meow like at everything, right? And they just loudly and obnoxiously meowing at everything, right? Um, but this is like my like second or third time in like a role player lobby, right? I had read the stuff, the rules in Purple Lotus. It was like, okay, yeah, be in character and like whatever. So I'd like read the stuff, but I'm like going there and I'm like trying to like interact with them, and I don't really know how to, because like I try talking and I'm just getting these meows, right? And so then I like start going around and like asking other people like, hey, like is the cat okay? Because like I had given them a cookie and they just like continue meowing at me, right? And so I like tried asking other people, like, hey, is the cat okay? And I didn't really get like any answer, right? I got like in character answers that were obviously in character, but like, I'm sitting there like really not sure what's going on, or like, because I had never seen anything like this before, right? Like, I was still getting used to the idea of being in character in the first place. So for all I had known, I could have just like upset this person that I didn't know who they were. Um, and I mean, this one has kind of like stuck with me as like something that, albeit was quite silly, um, it also ended up being like an intimidating situation where I like went and like tried to ask other people like, hey, is this normal? Is this okay? And I realized that I wasn't going to get an answer to that question. And so ended up leaving. And then this is another situation where just like a check-in mechanic could have immediate like this problem would not have been, or this would not have been a problem with the check-in mechanic present.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry. I'm just kind of imagining this scenario play out. I'm also
It
like,
was very silly.
a lot of this too is like really bringing me back to when I had first started, and like trying to think about the mindset that I was in while interacting with other characters. And like, I look back even to like some of my somewhat later stuff, like late season 2 of Fractured Thrones, for example, because that was my first big role play. That I would look back at that and like the things that I did within the context of like my third character, and like I would never do some of those things nowadays. Like my perspective is so much different. But at that time, I thought it was like decently advanced from when I had started. It's very much like the retrospection of like looking at the kind of decisions that you make and like the kind of style that you had and how that changed is like jarring sometimes. And I guess like I am like forced to like think back to at least some of that to think about like, well, what kind of aspects of safety are important for people that are new to roleplay, right? Like, how do you kind of bring people in and engage them in kind of a safe manner, right? There's a lot that we kind of miss by being around for a very long time. Like, well, we made this joke last podcast about like thinking about like very obvious things, like where does a roleplay take place, and like me going into Tales of Celestia and being like, all right, where is the roleplay actually happening, and it just wasn't written anywhere. But like it is really things like that. Like we think of some things that like as just kind of obvious or interpretable, but like they aren't, right? For like a lot of people, especially if they're barely getting used to the space. Like it is not obvious that a lot of these things are not easy to grasp. So it is kind of a mental exercise.
Yeah, I mean, I've really tried to like not let myself forget what it was like, you know, for exactly that reason. Because once you stay around for a while, you eventually you suffer enough to get used to it. But like, ideally, you wouldn't have to suffer to get used to it in the first place,
Yeah. I find that like
ideally.
I tend to exist in a lot of various voice calls with people and get their like perspectives on things, but just like asking guided questions. And I think that's like kind of a good way of like litmus testing the environments that those are in, just to like get an idea of like if these people have been around for like maybe a couple months, like what are their kind of thoughts like about this experience, what do they want, just to kind of like get a feeling for like how their time has been, and maybe like kind of guide them into potentially understanding things better if they're like struggling with something. Let's move forward here. Escalation. So this so we talked about check-ins here, where you have the just to check to see if people are okay. Escalation is a bit different. It's similar in that you have a signal to do this with, whether it's verbal or visual. But the idea is that the signal is very clear because it is your intent to either escalate or de-escalate with a key phrase or a gesture of some sort. So we talked about, we mentioned very briefly, oh please and goodness gracious. That one is a very commonly used one, where oh please, within kind of the context of legitimate character speech within a session, can be used to say, I want this situation to become more intense. I want to escalate this. And
you're literally telling your scene partner, yes, I like where this is going, and let's continue down this path. Let's make this more intense. Let's go in this direction.
Yeah.
That's what you're telling your partner when you say, oh please.
And the response is very important, because without it, you assume no escalation, right? But with the response, you either have please, which is your kind of confirmation that the partner does want to escalate. You have goodness gracious, which is effectively, no, I don't want to do that. I actually want to reel it back. I want to change the direction, de-escalate. And goodness gracious, in particular, can always be used proactively rather than reactively. So you don't have to wait for someone to give you the oh please to say, I actually don't want to do this. You could just say, in the middle of a given scenario, you know, like throw that goodness gracious somewhere within your character's speech, and then that signals to your partner that like I'm actually not enjoying what's happening right now. Can we pull it back a little bit?
I managed to. This is like an anecdote, just kind of like relating to actually having using this.
Sure, yeah.
I think in the scenario one Discord we ran. I forget what it ended up being entitled, but Elusive, she ran this one vampire, like kind of like one shot LARP thing.
It's first hunt.
Yes, first hunt. Thank you. Yeah. So, I was one of the vampires, and there's this one moment where one of the characters, you know, one of the players, he actually forgot like what the mechanic was to like compel one of the victim human players to do something. And so, you know, like he's communicating to me in character that he doesn't remember how to do this. Like, you know, I'm like cluing into the fact that he like doesn't know how to do this. And you know, like, you know, he's like, "Oh, could you like could you show me, like, you know, what does he say?" I'm like trying to remember. Do you remember what that like that passphrase was? Did you do that, Solus?
Yeah, I think it was. I think we did have. Oh please. Or actually, no. Wait, there was the key phrase for specifically the vampires controlling, right?
Yeah, yeah. I don't remember exactly what it was. It's not too important, but basically,
Yeah.
like, you know, he was like, you know, like, "Oh, please, would you show me how to do this?" And I was like, "Please, pretty please," and he's like, "Yes." And like, you know, I go in and like, you know, I kind of like do like a brief moment of like seductively like stroking his face and like running my finger down his body before like I just like, you know, hit him as hard as I could in the character's balls. And you know, he doubles over, like, you know, obviously leaning into it. And you know, like I tell him how to do it, like exactly the way that you're supposed to do it, like miming to him. Like I grab the back of his neck and like I say like, "I need you to like listen closely to me and like just pay the fuck attention," or something like that, like something along those lines. But like, you know, we're able to like, one, get over a miscommunication, or like, you know, kind of like a, you know, brief forgetting, sort of like the sort of like larger rules at hand. We were able to have like a cool little moment, and we were able to do it all nice and safely with each other, and like, you know, make sure everybody was okay, and he was totally okay with it. Like I chatted with him after, he's like, "Yeah, that was like pretty cool. I like that." So, you know, even for something like that, it was amazing. It was perfect. You know, just kind of like my own 2 pence on that sort of thing.
I think escalation de-escalation mechanic is like, in my mind, it's kind of like not specifically, "Oh please goodness gracious," there are other ones out there, right? That's kind of just the one that, you know, we've used a bit. But I think the concept of like an escalation mechanic is the poster child of like safety enabling intensity, because like that's literally what it's for, right? That's actually what you have the safety mechanic for, is specifically to intensify a scene, right? Like, um, I think this is kind of like, more or less exactly what we want to do, with these things. Oh, and I've opened the documentation here. This is why one shots are great. You have the documentation right here. The domination phrase was really, really. It's like, you really, really
Yeah,
hear
that's
me.
what it was. Yeah,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
"I
yeah.
really, really need you to get a grip right now," I think I said, is what I said to him.
Okay. Yeah. Now it's coming back to me. I like really really. That's actually really that's a flexible one. I'm a big fan of it. Yeah. Escalation is like. I don't want to repeat the point too much, but it is like super important. It really is like a poster child. Like, wait, oh please is like making its rounds with VR roleplay right now. A lot of people are using it to some degree, which I think is pretty
Oh,
good.
that's great to hear.
Yeah. Let's see what we have next. Oh, the next one I have listed is exiting scenes. So we kind of have a big advantage in VR with this because we have buttons that basically say poof from one place to another. That this cannot happen in real life, right? In real LARPs, you have to like you have to basically find your way out of a scene by like walking away from it, and you have to transport yourself to a place that's out of the game, and you have a lot of time between point A and point B. So that's a bit harder. In VR, we basically have the respawn button. If we really wanted to like get out of something, we could just like poof, and then that's it. It is also helpful to have like an understanding of how that should be taken in character in the session. Uh, for the case of like if someone exits immediately, you basically don't comment on it. In the sense of like they have disappeared. That is fine. You can move on with the scene. Do not make a big deal of like someone not being there. Like maybe someone if someone asks, like you can say, oh, they went to the bathroom or whatever, and then boom, you've basically explained it, right? Very easy to do that. For a lot of things like that, I mean, us role players kind of have to suspend disbelief. You very obviously can't just say, oh, they just poofed out of nowhere like that, because that's a lot of times not very reasonable. So something also worth thinking about is like, well, okay, if I can exit a scene by respawning or going invisible, which is like the immediate exit, but how do I exit scenes if I don't want to leave the world? Like if I want to still be in character and go to other scenes. A very popular one with LARP is the I forget what exactly they call it, but you cover your face with your hand and then put your head down, and that is like the signal to others that you are currently not in character.
Mentioned it's, hand on head.
Hand on head. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, Otan's gone.
IRL poof.
Yes.
Hand on head.
IRL poof. Yes, the hand on head is basically a signal to others that I am not in character right now. I am not in this scene. Do not mind me. I think I have myself done this, and I've seen a lot of other people do this, where they kind of like run around and will like consistently repeat that they are not in character, and like reinforce that by control sticking as far forward as they can to get to where they want to be. Which is like, it's something, but it's not very seamless if you have someone coming around like saying like, I'm not a character, I'm not a character, I'm not a character. Like it's a bit wild.
I think to kind of like add, I guess, onto this, like, or rather like kind of like, dive deeper a little into it, dial in on it, I suppose, if
Sure.
we're all okay. Not, it's like nothing like serious or like heavy, but like I think something that we could perhaps consider is like, maybe the usage of like invis mechanics or invis toggles to kind of like indicate to people that like, we're just kind of floating by. We're not really interested in like being a part of this scene or that scene or the other scene. We're just trying to go to where we're at. So that way we're not kind of like, full sticking into like other scenes that like, are just kind of like, potentially like disrupting the flow, because like we have that tool at hand, which is like kind of nice.
Yeah.
And I have, I suppose, like a couple of thoughts on this. First, I will mention that we are at the 2-hour mark. I feel like we are on track to probably finish it around 3 hours if we keep going at this pace. But just wanted to mention, because we said we would mention it. But anyway, exiting scene. Yeah, I guess there's a lot of different ways to do it, right? And I suppose like going invisible, it could be one, like hand on head, tap out. There are a lot of these mechanics that have kind of the same purpose, or similar purposes, which is to allow somebody to gracefully exit a scene. There are two things that are really important. Like whatever mechanic that you end up using, like whatever the specific mechanic that you end up using, there are two things that are very important. Thing number one is, I suppose, thing number one is actually two things. So let's say three things. Thing number one, if somebody's using a mechanic to exit a scene, you do not ask why they're exiting the scene. That's the first thing, right? Like that's what the mechanic is there for, to allow people to exit the scene. You do not ask why they're exiting the scene. You can do that. That's essentially, you don't do that to protect those people who would be uncomfortable telling you why, right? Like some people might have like a really serious reason that they're not, comfortable telling you. Or maybe some people might think that their reason for exiting is not serious enough. Um, this is, I suppose, a bit of a horror story. I was in the Purple Lotus showing somebody around. Um, it was like their first day doing a role play, and like they pause for a moment and like kind of go silent, and then they come back and they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry. If I hope you didn't hear that. The tornado alarm is going off outside." Um,
Oh.
we stopped right there. It was myself and Panda. We stopped right there. We told them, "Okay, you're going to exit VR right now." Um, and they were like, "Oh no, I can like leave through leave through the front door." And character, we're like, "No, no, no, no. Right? It's like exit VR." And like, thankfully, this person was like actually told us that this was happening, right? But like, imagine the situation where like, they like don't say, and they're like worried about like, not leaving in character or whatever, right? um so I mean, thankfully, once again, we got them to exit VR. But like, if you have the mechanic, right, you don't ask why, you just let them go, right? You
Yeah.
just let the person go. Thing number two, same reason. If you are the person using the mechanic to exit the scene, even if you are comfortable explaining why you are leaving, uh, don't do it. Same reason, to protect those people who might not be comfortable, right? Even if you have a really good reason and you're perfectly comfortable sharing it with everyone, just go. Just use the mechanic. Leave the scene. It can be. It doesn't need explanation. It'll be totally seamless. It'd be better for everybody.
I have.
And
Hmm,
oh, I suppose I'll just finish and then let you respond.
sure.
Then thing number three, also really important. If you have this sort of tap out mechanic, this mechanic that allows people to exit scenes without question, make sure it's without question. Make sure that your players don't feel like they're going to get like in character retaliation for using this mechanic. I'll give like a really big example. Like for example, maybe um, I personally don't am not the biggest fan of like medical role play. I especially like really detailed medical role play, like that is my limit, right? I don't want to participate in that sort of thing. So this I suppose affects me a little bit, but I've also seen it affect other people, where like I have definitely seen um, characters leave a scene where like medical RP was taking place, and then it kind of be thrown around where it's like, wait, do you not care about this character? Or they're dying. Do you not care about this character, right? If you first of all, if you have this tap out mechanic in place, you have to make sure that that doesn't happen. You want to make sure that you are able to leave that scene, and it be understood that if somebody's using this mechanic, that is sacred essentially, and you do not you don't question it, right? Whatever reason you make up in character for they leaving, it's not that's just there to kind of like in character explain it away, right? It's not there to then later punish the person for leaving,
Mhm.
right? Um, anyway,
Yeah, very important.
whatever mechanic you end up using, those three things, I will just make sure that those three things are in place.
So I did want to talk about a good example of how it was used in Worlds Apart by a specific person, and that was Forksy. Uh, where Forksy would often have to kind of pop out of VR to take care of their partner. And it would have to be a sudden thing. Like they would have to like immediately like headset off, go handle something for a few minutes, and then come back. So they were not able to like give a bunch of notice or like walk out of a scene and then kind of respawn or whatever. They had to like go immediately sometimes. So like they had this kind of like built-in kind of understanding of like they're a slime, so they could just like puddle up and then like sit around for a little bit, and that's like actually what they end up doing, which I thought was like pretty cool. It wasn't like something that was built into Worlds Apart in particular, but it was something that Forksy in particular communicated to the people that they were in scenes with. Like sometimes they'll just do that, and to understand why it's happening, it's like you don't have to explain. It's fine. You've got your thing. If you need to pop out, you're good. It's totally fine, and that was used really well. There were some cases where like I have been in multiple scenes where they had to like kind of puddle up, and what I do afterward would just depend on the scene of like whether I would stick around for like the continuation or like if it was something that was understood in character. But either way, the like Dylan said, the first and foremost thing that was very important about that is not punishing them for using that mechanic. Even in the case of like them having to do it in the middle of like a very heated conversation between our characters, we come back and it's at the exact same place it was. I'm not gonna sit there and berate them for having like effectively avoided the conversation, because obviously that's not what happened, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think that's a pretty good example of it being used. Yeah. We have a few more here. Pre-brief. That one is basically to say that we have the safety tools kind of figured out, and the people that are running the roleplay reinforce them and how to use them before going into session. So making sure that people are familiar with the tools, that they understand they have the tools. There have been a kind of uptick of different role plays, namely a lot of the public ones or the open ones that have established some sort of like consent mechanic. Aether Chronicles has like the kind of basis of consent where you can't engage in combat on the island unless it's consented to, stuff like that, where prefacing things like that and kind of reinforcing it is super important. Where even in the cases of like needing consent for everything, even if that's like in the rules of the Discord or like plastered up on the wall of the like respawn room of the world itself, even that might not be enough, right? Like you need to like show and evidence and practice these mechanics to basically reinforce that they are there and you can use them and you should use them. In the best case scenario, these aren't the kind of things where like silence is golden, right? You want these mechanics to be used to create this sort of framework. You want there to be check-ins. You want there to be escalation, de-escalation sort of key phrases being used to evidence that these are things that work and you can use them and you're not the odd one out for using them, because that again, being the odd one out is very alienating and it is very hard for someone to do if they're not seeing it already happen. Which actually brings, I'm going to tie in the next one because this is also a very related point, but the reinforcement bit. So reinforcement, this to me is super, super important, and I want us to talk about it a bit more, is that players with social capital use these safety mechanics openly. So when
like a personal plea.
Yes.
Like we are asking, please.
Absolutely. It is definitely the case where, I mean, we've talked about like people that have authority, people that have like kind of more control in a given situation, people will kind of follow more, kind of lead the sort of direction of like a community, what a community is kind of comfortable with. This is also the case in which the people with social capital are also the determiners for things that people take example from. So if you are that person, if you recognize that people look at what you do and take example from it, then you are the most responsible person for upholding this safety culture. I would say even more so than like the people running the roleplay. Because when it comes down to it, if we are, since we are urging that these are mechanics that need to be used often to be evidence, then the people who everyone's taking an example from are the most responsible for being the evidence of that framework. Okay, I breathe now.
Mhm.
That's good.
Yeah, and it's like, and I think Naylor brings up a good point here. Players with social capital, those same players are more likely to be okay with the scene, though.
Yes.
And yeah, I think this does kind of lead to somewhat the paradox. You know, it's like the people who have the social capital are likely to be people who have been, you know, around the space for a while now, right? And are also likely to be those people that have gotten comfortable with the culture of the space, right? And the sort of things that go on in it. And so like very often, you know, you're going to have the people who have the social capital might not actually personally like feel the need to use these safety mechanics. And like, you know, that's fair. You know, I mean, if you you know, I not we're not asking, you know, that we're not saying that everybody like needs for their own personal safety to use these, you know, safety mechanics, right? Like some people might actually have just like really, you know, really broad boundaries and be really comfortable exploring those boundaries, right? But if you have any amount of social capital in this space or any other space really, please use the safety mechanics. Show other people that it's okay. You won't even like break character. You'll just like, you know, do the okay hand. It takes like, you know, 2 seconds in a thing, and like with you doing that and like other people seeing that you use the safety mechanic to like negotiate consent, right? Like people will be like, oh well actually it is okay to use this, right? It's like we did the thing, nobody broke character. It took all of like 5 seconds, and we moved on, right? And if that becomes the norm, then it'll be like self-reinforcing, right? It'll be self-reinforcing, and those people who do need it will actually feel comfortable using it. I feel like that's really kind of like the biggest problem that we have in the space right now, is like we're trying to introduce these mechanics but nobody's using them. And it's really unclear if, you know, like, is it that everybody actually just, you know, is comfortable with everything? I would say A, unlikely, and B, I know for a fact that that's not the case because, you know, people have like discussed with me feeling really uncomfortable in certain situations, right? But
Mhm.
so I know for a fact that that's not the case, that everybody's like super comfortable. What's much more likely is that people feel uncomfortable using these mechanics because like if you're the only person doing it, then like that's pretty weird, right? Like you're the odd one out. You're the person or like the weak link or like whatever. And that's
You're
a
like
really
defying the
alienating feeling.
social norm, and
Yeah.
so like other people, like they're too afraid to rupture that, because it either like, you know, they feel like they themselves would be kind of like at risk for being like
Mhm,
targeted, or like, you know, they themselves would feel like they would lose power if they did.
mhm,
Because like, you know, it's not really like any secret that like people will engage in RP in order to exercise power over other people who don't feel comfortable like saying that they don't want to, you know, participate in sorts of, you know, like certain sorts of role play.
please, in short, even if you don't need them, just like throw out like an okay check-in every once in a while. Just let people know that it is okay to use these mechanics, right?
Literally
Um,
nothing bad can happen from doing this. If like somebody listening right now is like, you know, kind of keyed in or whatever, and like they got the clout, like nothing bad's gonna happen. um yeah.
I will promise that nothing bad will happen. If something bad happens, send them to me. Sorry. Um, Yeah, very, 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 very important. Otan says nothing bad will happen, or else, right? Uh, okay. Uh, so that aside, debrief. This is a very important one too. Uh, these actually exist quite a bit. They I feel like they very unintentionally exist, but like are one of the most important aspects of roleplay as safety that I think we've kind of now picked up on as an actual like safety mechanic is so debrief is where a session ends with a kind of set time where players are able to kind of socialize as players and decompress and discuss the session and potentially negotiate consents and such, which we'll actually talk about next. But yeah, just having the space to kind of decompress and ramp down from being in character is like super 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 important because there are a lot of things that can be very difficult to process when you're coming from a roleplay, even if it's not like super intense situations. Coming out of character is exiting what's called the magic circle, right? You've gone from thinking as someone else to now thinking about yourself, and that's an entirely different mentality. So like being able to somehow reinforce that once again we are people as players playing characters with each other, but we are still people, and by talking as people or reinforcing that we're people, all of that is super super effective in preventing that sort of like those potential negative aspects of bleed from
Yeah,
affecting us.
exactly. Yeah, and like also like being able to like literally process the feelings as like help internalize them too. Like it's safety, but it's also like just good like like memory practice to kind of like have that be something
Mhm.
that you do. Even like like I think it's best to be chatting with people that you've had these scenes with, right? But I mean, like even just like talking with somebody who like like maybe wasn't even involved in your scene and just like chatting about like what you did with other people, like that's like that's good too. you know I think it's best if like people chat with like their scene partners and stuff like that and see where everybody was at. But like just something to like help like reintegrate yourself, I suppose is sort of like the best way to put it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I have some like really I guess powerful experiences with debrief. Not not in the sense of like anything officially implemented by a roleplay, but I suppose this was during my time in gang roleplay. I hmm, all right. I'm going to take like approximately. I'm looking at the timer here. I'm going to take like 30 seconds to describe all the stuff that we got up to in this role play called gang role play. So if you're uncomfortable with like excessive descriptions of violence, uh, probably like I don't know, mute the video or like skip ahead for the next I'll say 45 seconds beginning now. um anyway, so gang role play was a role play where on my first day of playing a character there was an execution scene where a character was drug up against the wall. Like they were literally like lined up on their knees against the wall. Character was getting executed. That character's in character girlfriend was there, forced to watch. Um, and like there was like the torture and the execution, and then they like forced them to like throw the body into the ocean. This is the sort of stuff we got up to in this roleplay. It was really bad. All right, I'm going to stop. That was 45 seconds. That's just an example. We did a lot more, but that's I think that one kind of sticks with me. Um, anyway, so in this roleplay, we we did a lot. We did a lot of stuff that you know is really bad, really intense, and like potentially incredibly traumatic. Um, there were no official sort of like safety mechanics in this role play beyond essentially there was the idea that like if you can't take it, leave. Which I mean, I don't know. I certainly don't agree with that. I don't think that's very helpful. But what we did have in that role play was a very strong sort of community debriefing. Pretty much after every session, especially the intense ones, it was either immediately after the session or the next day, right? Next day at the latest, we would all hop in on a Discord and we would rewatch the events of the previous day from somebody's perspective, right? Obviously, this is VRChat roleplay. A lot of people are streaming, a lot of people are recording. So we'd rewatch the events of the previous night from somebody's perspective and, talk about it, like laugh about it. People would be like, oh, that was great. Like when that happened, like I loved it, and we would do this pretty much every time, right? Every time something um, of any level of intensity happened. It was a really strong culture. When I like started this role play, I didn't think I would be able to like exist in this role play, right? Like a role play with this concept. But it was really, I think, through the debrief um, that I came to kind of like understand and kind of like be reassured and back to the beginning, trust the people that I was role playing with, right? Like I was able to kind of like understand and kind of like see that everybody was in on this together. And it was I don't know, it was a really powerful experience. I highly recommend having dedicated debriefs. Even if it's like not necessarily mandatory like all the time, I recommend having it be organized, like having like a dedicated space for debrief. For this reason, if you're playing with intense emotions, it'll help. I promise.
Hmm. So there's like something really important to consider. Actually, Waffle made a comment here that I want to repeat. I find it funny between use safety tools to disengage from a scene and de-escalate, and if you can't handle it, leave is basically just phrasing and tone. Yeah, it's kind of it does kind of, I guess those are similar ideas, right? Like, but in the case of like the personal agency and the kind of, again, the phrasing and tone, like from the community perspective, like that's the real big difference, right? Like if you're building with trust, you are giving someone this tool of like, if something is too much and you do not feel comfortable kind of steering the direction of the scene, then you have this tool rather than just saying,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't like it, I don't want you here. That I think that last bit.
I think kind of like a good kind of like contra example to what was just given is like, one could say, yeah, I had to put my dog down yesterday, or one could say, yeah, I had to kill my dog yesterday. And like it like those are two different like kind of connotations and like describe different sorts of things, because you don't you don't really like know kind of like if you say one versus the other, it's gonna have this different sort of implication, right?
Mm.
Like to the purpose for these tools, and like kind of like the, especially just with like sort of like the reinforcement, is that like because I think reinforcement ultimately is like kind of like sort of the make or break versus one versus the other. It's, how do I put this? Like at like at the end of the day, like one could say that like sure, maybe it is like that, and also at the end of the day, it's like self advocacy is ultimately like the thing you have to do the
Mm-hmm.
most. And like we can provide all these tools for people and stuff, like like having other players check in and stuff like that. And like if you can't like show up and like at least like have some sort of self advocacy in that sort of aspect, it's maybe a good time to kind of like consider like what the purpose of your being there is, right? Because it's this isn't like, I have been in terrible RPs where it's like the latter is the thing that's happening. The former isn't even a question, much less a thought being had amongst anybody. Because if they were clued into that, they'd be like, okay, this is a toxic space. I can't be here. I need to get out. It like the sort of like regeneration of to really go into like the weeds about this, like the regeneration of kind of like these methods of like dominance and control. These don't like, they don't just like pop up, they don't pop up everywhere like that. And like it's kind of like after a certain point, it's almost like you have to ask like, well, what's the point of like even saying anything? You know what I mean? Like if I say hello to somebody, like I could say hey, or I could say hey, like like what's the difference? Like the phrasing and the tone is different, right? Like right?
Mhm.
Like does that necessarily mean that like me saying hey is like a bad thing? It's like no, it's like the tone matters. You know what I mean? And like the phrasing matters. Like
So
Yeah.
I'm going to devil's advocate, then I'll devil's advocate my devil's advocate.
Okay.
So the first one, right? The first one is like, well, yes, absolutely. So actually, I wasn't particularly complaining about the if you can't handle it, leave, in the sense of like, well, we just talked about that at the beginning, right? Like we were talking about disclosure, right? And that that personal responsibility of like understanding if the role play is right for you. That is very important, and like the most important thing, because at the end of the day, only you can make that decision as to whether or not the role play is right for you. So like so that's not necessarily what I was complaining about. And yeah, it was the tone and like the attitude, right? The attitude that this is the only thing, right? It's all 100% this and nothing else, right? But now I'm going to devil's advocate my devil's advocate, right? I, at the beginning of gang roleplay, did not think that the roleplay was for me. I was there to try it out. And then through this community debrief, it was okay, right? It was good. Like I actually really enjoyed the roleplay. The roleplay that by all means could have been incredibly, incredibly, incredibly traumatic. I ended up really enjoying it and having a great time with some lovely people. But I would say that so essentially, right? Like if I had followed the advice, I would have just left and never experienced that, right? So through the safety mechanic, it allowed me to explore more intense roleplay, and I would say because of those debriefs, that scene that I just described, which I won't describe again, but that scene that I just described that happened in gang roleplay was like I was fine with that scene because we did it, we had a debrief, and like it was a great scene. I was more uncomfortable, significantly more uncomfortable, in the scene with the ghost cat, the silly scene with the ghost cat that went meow. I was more uncomfortable in that scene than pretty much the entirety of gang roleplay because of that constant communication that we had amongst the players in that roleplay.
I think this is kind of like a good point to sort of segue into negotiation. I think if you don't mind, Solus, could I read this out?
Do you mind if I actually dial it up on like the control bit? Because I actually had a lot to say on that.
Yeah, sure. I just know that time was like a bit of a concern.
Okay.
But yeah.
I will say the stream time is at 2:19. So if we're going off of that, then it is better.
Oh, we did start a bit late. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah.
So
okay.
I mean,
Oh, we
if
have a
time
bit
is
more
a
time than I
it's
thought
if time
then.
is a big concern for you guys, then like do tell me. But
No,
Runtime is
I was just mostly saying it because I had no
No.
idea
okay.
if yeah. Okay.
So-
Okay, we're all good.
So I wanted to dial it up on this strictly because like speaking about like how we do debriefs, I actually had a very long discussion with with the people over in the Oasis server, Star Wars Oasis, about like how they want to do debriefs, and it's like there are like very valid discussions like how you want to do debriefs based on like the comfort level of the players. Like for example, if people don't really enjoy being in VR and having the headset on for much longer, depending on like what kind of headset they have, is like uncomfortable, then they won't want to be like kind of sitting around for another hour socializing with people if they just want to like take the headset off, wipe off the sweat or whatever it is that they've been in like some sort of like maybe big combat scenario or whatever. And that can be perfectly valid to say we're going to have our debrief some other way. We're going to organize it maybe in Discord, maybe organize some other like point in time where we can talk about it. But the purpose of it being that it is still intentional and that there's still time for it. One thing that I would be critical of in the case of like the Discord scenario is that there have been a lot of cases where if we're kind of just segueing more into like thinking about power, right? Power, the power structure of a roleplay, the social kind of capital that someone gets is very evidenced through like what people talk about when the roleplay ends. Like who are they talking about? Who are they talking around? What kind of people have a lot of people around them? And this is like basically the Discord example would very clearly evidence that, because like whose perspective are we watching and what do we think about it? What are we talking about around it? In the case of Fractured Thrones, like this is like absolutely evident, right? Like whenever the session would end, it would be a collection of like 15 or 20 people watching Brunswick's POV and only talking about that. And in Discord, you don't have a way to talk over other people unless you separate from them. So you don't want to separate from the group, but you can't talk about anything else other than like that POV, and that becomes like the focus of what people are talking about. That's like the power dynamic of the structure of how the post session conversations end up going, and that's like evidence there. So like I would personally say Discord is like not a very great structure for that. If it works out, it's one of those like good, it worked out, it created this good like strong cohesion bond between the players, but it could also be used for that sort of like control of social capital. And
yeah,
that's like exactly. Sorry, go on.
Tying debrief behind streaming and recording is probably not a good idea. I will probably admit. That's I definitely would not specifically tie it to that. I think you're absolutely correct. I was just more so saying that like we did have that like very strong debrief culture.
Yeah.
Which was a good thing.
Yeah, to wrap up the thought, like if it works out, it's good. If it doesn't, like it can be pretty bad. And like the reason why I always and will continue to still push for in VR debriefs is that you can move around, right? You can talk to other people. You can still be in the debrief and talk to any group that you want while not interfering with anyone else's conversations. And that
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I thought you. Yeah.
That's pretty much the end of my thought.
Oh, okay, all right. I was gonna say kind of like that's like one of the kind of like the key beauties of like VR chat. It's just kind of like that spatialized audio, because like we just don't have like any other way to like communicate via spatialized audio in a way beyond just kind of like opening it up like a this goofy little Unity social game thing. And like I think for like maybe something like that, like there could be just kind of like an ask, like, hey, like if you need to jump out the headset, like please feel free to rejoin just on desktop. And like I've seen tons of people do that too.
Yep.
They hop out, they're not comfortable for going like like Iron Man sessions inside of the headset. It's just like they're once they want to get in and out, and that's cool. Like and I think it's doubly cool that they want to stick around just on desktop too. But yeah, like I think that is like just kind of like a sort of like an interesting like concern and like kind of like thing.
Yeah, and that's like something that's very very worth talking about, right? Because that's like the structure of how that happens like very very heavily informs like the community dynamics that you're operating under, because every role play is also a community, right? That's we organize and socialize on a platform that is used for community socializing and organizing. So that is like kind of part and parcel with us using the Discord structure to kind of organize all of our stuff. Like LARPing, at least the Nordic space, like kind of organizing on Facebook is a little bit more detached, because like you go to the event and like you organize going to the event, and then you have your debrief and then you leave the event. Even though you're still kind of connected on Facebook, it's like you're at least, there's at least a little bit of distance.
Very much a big part of like what makes VRP so kind of like, different in its own fundamental way than sort of like IRL RPs.
Yes.
Is like that consistent, like, the persistence of presence beyond sort of like the quote unquote real.
Yeah. And just to like wrap up the idea, like to reference something else, which we will actually get into with our 12th principle, is that you can't even have these post-session debriefs with like everyone involved if you don't end the session at the same time for everyone, or at least around the same time. So just having a soft end means that you can't do structured debriefs right after the session, which is what is kind of the usual format for it. It makes it a lot harder. So that's one tally on the marks of why I always advocate for some sort of hard end. But that is like a related topic, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, soapbox placed aside. Now let's move on to negotiation. You said you wanted to read it, B, so I give you the reins.
Yeah. Negotiation. Players talk to each other out of character to explore boundaries and talk about desired conflict, intensity, etc. Ideally before it even happens.
I didn't know if you wanted to like expound on your views on it.
Well, I originally I did, because I was like, oh, I have like a good kind of like segue. But if you want to take the reins on this, actually, that'd be great, and then I could rebuild kind of like what I was thinking about.
Okay, I got you. Sorry about that. So I guess to expand on this, right? Like this is like basically the dynamic in which we just we have players talk to each other, right? In the very, very simple kind of reductive breakdown of it, it's just players talk to each other. Players talk to GMs. But the real specifics of it is like, okay, well, what do they talk about? Like how much do they organize between each other? How much do they preface each other on things that they're planning? And this is where consent negotiation comes in. It's like, if I intend to do something with another player that could potentially like be uncomfortable in any way, whether it's like player versus player conflict, or maybe you want to explore some sort of really potentially difficult sort of scenario, then you kind of open up that line of communication to say, hey, I potentially plan to do this. Are you cool with it? And then you can kind of have this back and forth where the person might say, yeah, this is great. I think we can do this too. Or maybe the person's like, actually, that's not something I'm comfortable with. Can we do this instead? And then you can kind of build that sort of basis of like, okay, now that we have this sort of like working understanding of what we're going to do, now we can do it a lot more easily because we have like good kind of understandings of each other's boundaries and where we want to go. So it doesn't necessarily just need to be like finding out where the boundaries are. It could also be just like understanding the direction. So what people want to do. So like in the examples that we talked about before, where it's like I'm going a direction I don't actually enjoy with this role play. It's not like it doesn't necessarily need to be I feel like my boundaries are being disrespected, but it's just the case of like I don't enjoy this. I want to go a different direction. You can negotiate that too. Right, you could say, what direction do you think this should go, and then move from there. I've recently had the pleasure of being able to do that with some with various role players, and it worked out very well. I will also say it is also potentially the kind of thing that if you don't cover enough bases, can go very poorly if you don't talk about direction. I had this issue once again with Fractured Thrones. My second character had this like very personal character to character sort of conflict of like the prince and the I don't want to say servant. She was effectively like a family that was ranked under his, and the idea was that we were exploring this sort of like disgruntled exile versus like the person that has all of the weight on his shoulders, and was misconstrued to have intended poorly where he tried to intend as well as he could. Very much that original point, which we talked about, was very intended. That was absolutely within the plans of what we were going for. It was me and Lauren, by the way. And we had what I believed to have been a really good negotiation out the gate with our characters. I thought it went very well. What didn't go very well afterward was that we had very different ideas of direction, and that ended up making it very frustrating to continue with that with that character interaction, that character, the tie-in between each other. I think there was frustration from both ends. I think had we both been more understanding of the directions we wanted to go, and were able to negotiate it better, had I known how to do that beforehand, I think that it would have ended far better for both of us. I don't think there was any. I will very confidently say there was not any malice involved with this. It was just two people had very different ideas of how they wanted their characters to go, and then both ended up a bit far from each other on where they wanted to go, and it ended up not being as good of an experience where it could have been better. And that's like, totally fine as long as you recognize that and work on that and figure out how to bring up these sort of conversations.
I don't think I have too much to say in negotiation other than like I feel like a lot of people already kind of do this with their friends. Like I see this happen a lot where like people kind of message each other like privately to like negotiate scenes or like the direction that roleplay is taken in. So I think that's really good. I think this already happens a lot. I would love to see it done like slightly more publicly though. Like I would love to see negotiation done more publicly. Once again, for the same reason of like the reinforcement, right? Reinforcing that yes, this is a thing that people we do. This is like a social norm because I think it is. I think like negotiation is a social norm. It's just kind of hidden usually.
Yeah.
And we want to kind of like project that it is a social norm. Yeah, I don't have too much more to say about it other than like it's gonna. I think for the most part, people tend to do it. Once again, usually centers around friends in my experience. But I think like if you're in a role play and like you have a scene with somebody and you're like have ideas of like where to take it, just message them. Message them or like find some other way to reach out, be like, hey, thought this was pretty cool and I think we can take it in this direction. And you might find that like the other person has a completely different idea, or you might find that the other person had exactly the same idea that you had, and you were just like nervous to proceed. I actually had this recently where like I'm playing a rather silly character, and I was like wanting to like playing a crafter, and like I don't want to craft as my crafter. And so like a character comes to me like, hey, I need this thing crafted. I'm like, so I messaged them after like, is it okay if I like don't finish this? And then they're like, hey, yeah, actually that's exactly what I was going for, funnily enough. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, well, that's
Cool.
perfect.
Yeah.
So sometimes it works out. And yeah, so but I would love to have more of this negotiation be like slightly more public, or at least even if it's not public, at least there be like an acknowledgement that like yes, this is normal. This is a thing that people do, because it really is helpful.
I think that like negotiating scenes and stuff like that is almost like the quote unquote secret sauce of like, VRP or whatever. Cause like, people do it like literally all the time, but they like don't really conceive of it as kind of like this sort of like,
Mhm.
this sort of like technique or like tactic to kind of like, understand like where a player or is at with like, how their character is, or like, like where what they want to be doing with their character or whatever. Um, and like it personally took me, and I'm still really bad at it, I'll be real. It took me like the longest time to understand that, like, yeah, like, um this is just like a norm. It's kind of just like a regular communication skill that you like flex like a muscle.
It's not
um
metagaming.
yeah, it's not metagaming. Most importantly, it's not like bending the rules or anything. like yeah, sure, like maybe you should go out of your way to like chat with people that like aren't necessarily your friends, but it's like okay to just like, if you're just kind of doing it with your friends, that's fine too. But like yeah, like, definitely, I'm glad to say that this is just kind of like already sort of like a norm to some degree, but I just wish people would talk about it a little bit more.
Mhm.
Mm.
I think it's also like important to not just fail it as like communicate more, because I think that I've definitely seen that quite a
Yeah.
bit, where you just like have the base the base ask of players to just like communicate with each other. It's like, okay, well, what does that mean? How do I do that? What kind of things do I talk about? What like do I plan things out with them? I feel like that would be forcing the issue too much. How much should I improv? Like these kind of questions would come up if you don't like actually talk about like how or like what kind of things that you think would be good to
Mhm.
kind of like negotiate with. So I would it's something that I think I've done in Legacy that I've personally kind of written out like, here's how to do it, right? Like if you're not
Mm.
comfortable with this, like this is a good template, right? Just that this should be good enough for you to kind of open that bridge of communication up with each other. I think that's very important.
Yeah. And like I suppose to add to that, right? Like, yeah, just communicate more is like also like not super helpful. Like, negotiation is just one tool. We've been discussing like where I don't know how many tools we're in now, right? This is just one tool. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. There are, lots of things you can do. Um, Lots of different ways that you can accomplish similar things, and using a mix is generally good. So
Yeah. And something to always keep in mind is that you can't plan for everything. You can negotiate beforehand, in the ideal case, but sometimes things come up in session that you weren't prepared for, and then maybe you do need to have that sort of negotiation in session if it's like that important. You can do that. You can do that. Usually the first step is to like try to calibrate or understand, but if like you really need that moment of just like sitting down, like, okay, I'm actually very not okay with this, and I want to establish a boundary here, that is doable. You can do that as absolutely recommended if that's very needed, right? And even afterward, debrief is a good place to negotiate afterward if something happened that like, maybe you endured it for the session, but like maybe you're actually not comfortable with the thing and you talk about that. Like that's again something we do already quite a bit, but it's important to kind of understand like it is a thing that we do, and this is what it's useful for, and this is a good space to kind of do it with. All right. And now the last example we have uh, is reasonable expectations. This one is a very interesting one, I feel, because it kind of like runs along with like how a role play is designed and like how much people are involved and like what's expected out of people to be involved in some capacity. The reasonable expectations one basically says that players and staff are not expected or forced to sacrifice their well-being to contribute in their expected capacity. Um, I have not yet had the experience of running a role play, so I think Dylan can speak a lot more on the staff side of it. But to kind of like at least preface it, there is a very prevalent sort of crunch culture that exists in VR roleplay currently, where because we have all of these weekly role plays, that you have to fit a lot of things within the downtime between the weekly roleplay sessions. And a week is, for a lot of those things, very little time. Uh, and that kind of like creates this sort of culture of like, well, you got to get these things done. It's very high tempo. We got to get this out on the map. We got to figure out the story weave. We got to like, et cetera, right? So there's a very high tempo sort of culture of like, we need to get this done. We need to figure this out. Otherwise, things slow down. Otherwise, we lose things in the middle. Yeah, it's like my perspective on
I
it.
think like this is just kind of like you know, I see so many of my friends and like loved ones just like break themselves down, like blood, sweat, tears, everything, just like over all of this. And like, you know, I get it, because like I'm obviously here for like a reason, right? Like, you know, I didn't, you know, I didn't like stick around after like, you know, moving 30 different times and like, you know, having real life stuff pop up and I just can't do this stuff anymore and yada yada and whatnot. Um to do all this, but like, you know, I think honestly like this last point in of itself could just be a whole episode, and like you could just go, you know, straight into the weeds about kind of like the labor demand and like expectations for like everybody that involves themselves in this. And you know, I think really it's, you know, all of these points are important, but I think like this one is like perhaps the most important. Um and like, you know, for some people like it's like just something that like, you know, this is just kind of like their livelihood and they have to be breaking themselves over this, which is like, you know, I wish this wasn't the case. And like, you know, I want people to like have healthier
Mm-hmm.
interactions and relationships with this. But like, you know, they're really, you know, it's I this is probably the point that like probably like just makes me kind of like, you know, like feel a thousand different ways about it.
Right.
Not in the sense of like me disagreeing, of course, just like, you know, I'm, you know, it hurts seeing, you know, because I've seen the staff side and it's like, you know, a meat grinder, and like people just get burnt out and like nobody's getting paid, and like, you know, everyone's losing sleep, and nobody like, you know, kind of like cares, or like they do care, or like, you know, nobody respects them or anything like that. It's just like
Mm-hmm.
it's painful. And like, you know, I think it kind of speaks to like a large need for like, you know, kind of a change in like what actually is like a reasonable expectation for people to like, you know, be showing up to role play, and like, you know, what does actually like a reasonable schedule look like for a lot of people. um and like, you know, what can we actually, you know, be doing sort of on this front to make sure that people like aren't, you know, killing themselves just like trying to make this
Mm-hmm.
stuff happen, or like trying to like want to be in this, because like, you know, like as much as I you know, I can't like kind of like bury my head into the sand and say like, oh well, like, you know, people make friends, you know, other way or blah blah blah. It's like, sure, maybe like I can do that, but like even I am like, you know, friends with a lot of people because of like VRP, and like I can't go ahead and be like, you know, well maybe you should just like think about doing something else, or like, you know, maybe you should take some time away, because it's like, you know, for some people this is just like the only thing they have, or whatever. And it's like, you know, at some point it's like, you know, like where do we kind of like, you know, go together and say like, how do we like not make it so that way like our friends are just like doing that, you know, and just
Mm-hmm.
like dying over this over and over again.
I want to like re-emphasize too the point you just made there, that there are people that whose livelihoods kind of depend on the space. Those people are
Yeah.
very much able to spend as much time as they can to invest in the space and to invest in the projects that they're in and roleplay far more than the person who maybe does it as a hobby outside of their like 9 to 5 and has like a couple other things going on in their life. Maybe they have a larger family to spend more time with or whatever. Like people have other things to do. So like creating a space that is able to accommodate both of those types is like, to me, the goal, right? This is what you want
Yeah,
to happen.
absolutely. Yeah.
I'm looking at the time, so I won't get too deep into it here.
Mhm.
I'll have more to say on this for our last episode on no extra credit. But another gang RP anecdote. We had a lot of fun in that role play, and like maybe even at some points too much fun at the sort of the height of gang role play. What happened is essentially this is why we'll get to like the no extra credit territory. We were allowed to hold our own sessions in that role play. We were essentially the players. We organized our own sessions for that role play. At the height of this, there was gang role play 5 to 6 days a week, every week. And there was like an immense amount of pressure to attend every single session, because if you didn't attend every single session, you would come back the next day to like a billion messages into Discord and like everybody, like crying over like all the cool scenes that happened and like everything. It was really intense pressure to be there all the time, and that I can confidently say was not healthy. It was really not healthy. We as the players kind of like did it to ourselves, and eventually the staff did step in and like put an end to that. Well, okay, I wouldn't say put an end to it, toned it down. We still went a bit crazy, but it wasn't 5 to 6 sessions a week anymore, thankfully. Yeah, so like that was I can confidently say that was a very unhealthy, not good for the mental health and the stamina and like the burnout of anybody involved. It's really poor experience, and like yeah, it's reasonable expectations. I should not have to spend like 40 plus hours a week in a role play to like be a part of it. I've heard stories of like not participation, but like staff of people doing like 100-hour weeks for role plays. No,
Yeah.
we need to. No, that's not okay. That's never okay. If your role play is in that position where your staff needs to do a 100-hour week to get it done for the next week, you take a break. That if you ever find yourself in that position where you need to take like that drastic measures to stay on time, then you need to pause, reevaluate the your schedule and kind of like what your staff is able to doing, and like proceed from there, because that's not reasonable. Honestly, even if you were getting paid, it's like still not reasonable. But of course, nobody here is getting paid, so.
And even if people are like, I've had to sit in a call with someone. Well, I didn't have to. I was in there. I was in a call with someone who was an avatar maker for a roleplay. Who you could basically hear in his voice, he was fucking exhausted beyond all reason. This guy was like barely able to muster any energy to talk about the fact that he was just burning out so hard, but he was just like struggling with like saying anything that wasn't that he has to finish something still. Like he still had work left that he was talking about, like that he had to do, and it was like, can you take a break? Like what how can you help yourself in this situation? And he's like, no, I got to finish it. And listening to that was just painful. Like this guy had no help effectively. Had to basically pump out all these models because he was just kind of being forced to. He was getting paid for it, but it was like, there's this expectation of like he has to make everything, and if he doesn't, like what happens then? You don't want to know, right? it's one of those kind of situations, and it's like there is a bit of like glorification of crunch culture. I feel where like people may like after session talk about like this map took the map maker 2 weeks. Like we should all congratulate that, and I think like generally don't do that because that's just promoting this sort of like culture of wow, because it was very good that you took very little time to do it, that means we should do that again. This is more of an issue in the US, but not exclusive. I actually think it's also quite an issue in like if we're talking work culture, I think like Japan has a very crunchy sort of work culture, but we don't have to like get too far into that.
Yeah, there's like it's something fun, although this is just like so beyond the scope of this sort of conversation, is like having a chat with sort of like the Japanese RP scene about kind of like what they do, but obviously like that's like a different topic for a different day.
I'd want to know like how I get in touch with the Japanese roleplay scene. I think that'd be pretty cool.
I haven't really tried. I know who like some of the larger people are, but like beyond that, it's like obviously the language barrier is like huge, and like we would need somebody like to really act as like a liaison and whatnot.
Yeah.
This is related to the reasonable well, this is like semi-tangentially related, I guess. What would you like if y'all were to like put a dollar number on like the amount of labor that you've done for like RP? Like what would that dollar amount be, like as like a salary, or like yeah, I feel like this would probably be commensurate to like the level of stuff that I've provided.
Total or salary? Like, because that makes a big difference for me.
How about both? We'll say both.
Total, probably somewhere around the $10,000 range.
Yeah, I don't know about dollar amount. I will say, because I have been timing myself, the GM menu, which is currently in use by quite a few role plays. I don't know. I think it's like at least 6 or 7 role plays using it now. That represents around 400 hours of my time. That alone, with nothing else included.
That's 10 whole work weeks. That is 10 whole work weeks right there.
So if you assume like a $30 per hour sort of commission rate.
I mean, I'm not going to pretend like we can talk about like money. I don't even think it's fair to like go for like, industry standard, like dev, right? Like at the end of the day, this is a hobby, right? Like,
I'm not going to comment on any
even
of this.
This is a hobby. I'm getting stuff out of it, but like, even if we like did like, minimum wage calculation, right? Like, and obviously this is skilled labor. Like, even if we did like minimum wage calculation, that's a lot, right? And like, I'm going to put it out there freely, but I will say, 400 hours, do the math. Be like, okay, well, how much is this worth? How much, hundreds, maybe thousands of hours roleplay staff is putting into the thing, and we're getting it for, or participants are getting it without paying money, right?
Yeah,
it's a lot. It really is. I would recommend we wrap up though. I'm like looking at the time; we are suspiciously close to 3 hours. I want to ask some questions too, or
yeah, I do want to make a couple of very quick points just before we move on. One is that it being free is not a reason to avoid criticism.
Of course.
That has been used several times in my experience, and it is an awful excuse. If you have a chance to make something better, do it. And the second thing is like, LARPs are monetized, right? Like like IRL LARPs are often like you buy a ticket to a LARP, and that is how you end up participating, and that funds like the LARP being able to set up things. And I think like it's like something we've talked about quite a bit lately of like, it's very hard to sustain a model where everything gets the money gets poured into the project, but like everyone that participates in it only has to like invest in like their own props and models, and then nothing else. So
It's
it's one of
very
those situations.
like fuck you, I got mine, and it's like it like it just like it breaks my heart in like a lot of different ways because it's like I don't want to get too deep into it because we really ought to wrap up. I'd love to like
Mhm.
chat about this in the future, but like
Yeah.
Yeah.
just kind of like everybody that could do this and get paid to do it would probably be like living a lot better, not in terms of like, oh, we're getting paid more, but just like it's like hey, like this I'm my labor is like being recognized in a way that isn't just kind of like kudos, which kudos is great, it's amazing, but also like the DJ scene in VR chat does like tips, like sometimes like people will just
Mhm.
tip out the DJs, um you know like other world devs and stuff like that. They got, I mean, obviously like monetization for that is a lot simpler like in the grand scheme of things, because like if you're just like a single world dev, like hey, all the money goes to you. But
Mhm.
like it's just like this sort of like the pain of decentralization amongst all of this stuff is like kind of like the bane and boon, because like it makes it very easy to have all this stuff be so freeform, but at the same time it's like like there we don't have like we don't have character or prop departments, like we have like individual avatar devs and stuff like that, which is just
Yeah. So
Man, as much as I would like to like go into this, I
mhm.
do to bring it back to safety. I have like one final thing because I imagine we're wrapping up here. I have one final thing,
Yeah.
things to say on the topic of safety. I see a couple of people that are here and have made it through this discussion. If so, congratulations. But this is more of like a personal ask here. Um, Safety is important. It really is. Please, 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 please talk about safety to other people in the space, right? In role play, like talk about it, normalize it. It needs to be a thing. Also, if you feel like you aren't in the position, or like maybe you don't speak eloquently enough, or you're just nervous to talk about it, right? um in that case, just like send this recording to people, just like throw it out there. I know it's 3 hours, just like slap it at people, let us do the talking, the yapping, whatever. Where that's what we're doing here. But please, 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 please help us normalize this, because it is it's really important.
Yes. Super, super important to normalize a discussion around it. And excuse me, to facilitate you guys sharing this information from the recording on YouTube, I try to chapterize and timestamp everything that are like kind of the major topics of the podcast. So if you guys want to link stuff, it should be a lot easier to do that. Yeah. So to very quickly wrap up the reading part of this, we'll go through the last paragraph here. Uh, Workshopping and modeling these techniques is important to build a culture around safe intensity. By doing so, we are refusing to shy away from our strong themes while enabling players to explore them and build trust more effectively. I think that's a good note to wrap up the podcast on. So if
Yeah.
y'all have any questions in the meantime, feel free to throw them into either of the channels. But while that happens, I would like to ask Beef, uh, you know, while we're wrapping up this podcast, like where can people find you? What kind of stuff are you up to?
you can find me in the whispers and the winds. No, so I that's honestly that's a good question. I haven't been streaming a lot of my stuff, of the stuff that I do. Normally it would just be I'm here on Twitch just running under Hot Beef. You can watch some of my older stuff. It's probably not as great as it could be. I currently am only really involved in just one role play, which is namely Wardens. Probably will be more in the future now that I'm finally like settled and like am not doing weird, moving around stuff. And hopefully I'd like to at some point soon, maybe like start my own RP is once I finally have like the comfort of like doing map work down, which is obviously like the most laborious part. And then I'm also participating in the game jam that's going on in the Scenario 1 Discord, which is still open for submissions. Am I right, Silent?
Whoa, yeah.
Whoa!
like,
Look at that segue, right? Ooh.
Nice.
You got like another week to submit a game.
Ooh, a week.
If you are here right now.
If you're here right now,
Oh.
right now.
Right now. Sorry, I'm looking at the scenario 1 command I have, and I think it does put the link to the Discord, and I hope it is a valid one. But there you go. There's scenario 1. If you wanna go there, check out the game jam. There it is. Click the invite link. Hell yeah. And I had it up above, but I'll do it again. If you want to learn more about Couchform, the thing that we're talking about today, and any other further discussions that we're having, link is valid. Beautiful. Thank you, Nilu. If you want to learn more about Couchform and the principles behind this style of roleplay and the essential things that we have asserted about safety today, you can read up on them in the document right there, and continue the conversation in the Myriad Discord server where Couchform lives and where we are currently in the On the Couch podcast channel right now.
The link is invalid, so if you'd like to update that at some point in the near future, yeah, I know, I'm sorry.
I'll have to update it.
Oh no.
Let me create another one right now, and I will.
Yeah.
I think I updated that one pretty recently. That should be fine. I'm gonna take a quick look. Oh no, this is not the right one. Okay, yeah, that's fine.
This is where you.
This is the old one. Okay, here. There we
let me
go.
Check the one in the About Us.
Yes, that is the one. I just copy
That's the
pasted
one.
it.
Yeah, that's correct. Okay,
Yep.
cool.
I'll have to update it in the command. Oh yeah, there you go.
Wonderful.
All right,
so
prepared this time.
It seems like we're about time, right? Or question mark?
Yes, we're about to. We're landing now. The parachute is bringing us down to the ground, and we're gonna land on the ground in the middle of a field. Dear God, where is civilization?
Remember to slick the landing. Do not land straight on your legs, or else you'll. Ow, my legs!
Oh God! Ah! All right.
I don't have legs.
All right.
Oh my God!
She said, "Look at her." All right.
I mean, I got 2 heads, so that's fine.
Now that 2 of us are injured, we have to go to the nearest hospital, miles away. Dear God. All right. Take care, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.